Chapter 771. Sacrifice. Justice. Diminish attacks that exceed the strength level of the target. Lessen the damage inflicted upon heroes under siege and when facing large war machines. Mercy. On receiving a fatal injury, activate the life potential of the target, maintain vital signs, and reduce the number of direct deaths. Fearless. Decrease the impact of psychological shock or fear, weaken effects like divine suppression, and boost the morale of the troops. Sacrifice. Share and deflect non-physical damage, distribute the impact across multiple targets to mitigate the degree of harm as much as possible. Humility. Augment the defensive capabilities of the target to some extent. The effect is considered as an overlay of light leather armor specifically against physical damage.
Honor.
The unique war divine skill of the Church of Knowledge, through achievements in battle such as defeating enemies, breaking through military formations, and conquering strong opponents to gain victory, which in turn restores and temporarily enhances one's own strength. The more battles they fight, the braver and more invincible they become. The command was issued, and the vast military formation started to operate like a machine. Chants floated through the sky, transforming into large-scale divine arts that descended upon the thousands of soldiers about to march. Contrary to what many people might believe, the number of soldiers attacking the city walls at the same time during ancient sieges wasn't as many or dense as imagined. Even the walls of the mythical era, taller and broader, could not support the so-called tens of thousands in siege warfare. Various simple siege engines were ready. Lane could see that the large crossbow bolts on the city walls were prepared. Perhaps these were things that should not have appeared in this era, but under various influences, they had begun to reveal their prominence. Speaking of which, this is really the first time I'm seeing these large-scale, war-specific divine skills. It's surprising, many things just start with a beginning, and from there, they can give birth to such results. Under the glow that covered the battlefield, the already elite Athenian formation became even more solemn and concentrated. In comparison, the defensive forces of Eryxis, although they had similar means, were more than a notch below. This was normal, as compared to Athena, who held divine authority over war. Practitioners of the goddess of agriculture were naturally less adept at these things. Even Ares, who also presided over war, his followers were influenced by the deity. According to the records, the war god church's war divine skills focused more on enhancing the soldiers' reckless fighting abilities. They could ignore pain and fatigue, and never retreat in the face of death. But in terms of survival rate, could only be said that this was not their forte. Thud, 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 thud. The drum beats sounded, and the armored soldiers began to advance. The afternoon sun shone on the earth. Even the raised dust was clearly visible. "Sir, I'll go get ready now." Witnessing this scene stirred Solomon's emotions. Many people wouldn't understand the shock and beauty of the collision of armies if they had not seen it with their own eyes. If it wasn't for the final step that required him to finish tuning the so-called war machine by inserting the crystal stone Hermes gave him, Solomon might really have preferred to watch this probe to the end. "Go ahead. I await your good news." Waving his hand slightly, Lane wanted to see what Hermes had managed to research over these years. The paths were many, but they all led to the same destination. The pinnacle of alchemy might also reach the domain of creation, and although it was impossible for him to change his path midway, it was always good to have some understanding. Thud, 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 thud. The sound of drums, stirring and boiling the blood in one's heart. Standing on the city wall as an outsider who had happened to stay, Seville was fortunate enough to witness this war closely. He was not a citizen of Eryxis, nor did he revere the goddess of agriculture. The reason he could stand here was because of his own request and his special status. As a friend who had wandered many places with Odysseus, the new king of Ithaca, his original intention was to purchase a batch of food here, but he stumbled upon this situation. He had planned to leave, but a far-ranging missive made him change his mind. He would stay here, watch this war, and then relay what he saw to Odysseus. His childhood companion was finally setting out to build his legacy under the gaze of the gods like the ancient heroes. and as his friend, he would do everything in his power for him. Mr. Seville, how do you find the army of Athens? An elderly woman's voice brought Seville back to his senses, and he couldn't help but show an apologetic look. He knew who was speaking, the person who brought him news from Odysseus, who also ensured his safe departure when the city was breached. This was a practitioner of the heavenly empress, a prominent figure within Hera's church in the mortal realm. And the reason for her presence here was not simply for him but more for Odysseus. Objectively speaking, Athens under Theseus is indeed powerful. Among all the kingdom's militaries I have seen over the years, few can compare with them, especially the principal goddess of Athens, the respected queen of victories. Her divine authority is too suitable for a nation's development and also too fitting for an army's combat. In this respect, the other revered highnesses probably cannot match. Seville spoke cautiously yet frowned slightly. But, forgive my frankness, I don't know if their commanders lack experience or if it's intentional. Chapter 772 Sacrifice _2. But in reality, now is not a suitable time to launch an attack. In the afternoon, fatiguing the troops with a long expedition, and besieging a city. All these terms combined, each represents a typical negative buff. If it were Seville himself, he would definitely choose to rest overnight and set up camp, instead of attacking rashly. Of course, given the huge gap between Athens and Eryxis, even if the opponent's commander acts inappropriately, I still don't think the city will hold. After all, you understand, in the face of absolute strength, skill is of little use. The evaluation was very objective, and even though there was nothing particularly impressive, the priestess of the heavenly empress nodded in satisfaction. She did not understand military affairs, nor did she care how much this person understood. But she needed to ensure this person could make an objective judgment of the situation and then report it to the king of Ithaca. As for the rest, it was of no concern to her. The gods approved of the bravery and wisdom of the king of Ithaca and were willing to give him a chance. And as a priestess of the gods, she did not need to question, only to comply. Indeed, no god is omnipotent. Not even the great heavenly empress has ever claimed to be. Her demeanor was calm, though the deity she worshipped now regarded the other as an enemy. As Hera's godhood practitioner, the priestess still showed respect to Athena. This is also a common occurrence amongst the gods. In the eyes of most gods, I can hate and curse another god, but that does not mean mortals can do the same. Even if that mortal is disparaging a god I dislike, I would only crush the daring mortal after mocking them. And as a godhood practitioner, this was particularly evident. So you're saying, Mr. Seville, that Athens indeed has strong inherent strength. But if they lack other means, then such a command style suggests a lack of experience, right? Yes, that's quite normal. Especially since no one would have expected King Theseus to die so easily. Seville nodded in agreement. For a king who was young, strong, and exceptionally skilled, often there was no need to cultivate military prowess in the next generation. Even if necessary, it was to train an heir. Unfortunately, Demophon had already been sent away from Eryxis. He would appear in the alliance as a recognized representative of Athens within the anti-Athens alliance. If that's the case, then that's much better. With a slight smile, the priestess of Hera felt the news was quite agreeable. However, in the next moment, the priestess, who appeared to be old and in reality was even older, suddenly faltered in her expression. She pointed toward a direction in the distance and asked subconsciously, "And that? Mr. Seville, what is that?" Confused, though unsure of what she was referring to, Seville still looked in that direction. In the distant land, he seemed to see 3 writhing shadows. The shadows flickered, as if concealing something. The next moment, as if sensing the gaze from afar, the 3 shadows stiffened and then abruptly rose. What kind of monster is that? The view blurred, and then Seville saw their true forms. They were not mere shadows, but 3 huge demons crouched on the ground. They seemed dead, yet for some reason they were now alive again. Gradually, from stiffness to fluidity, they shook their bodies, looking towards this side of the city wall. "Mr. Seville, do you recognize them?" With a solemn face, the female priest said seriously, "Or rather, do you think this city is still safe? If this were a real kingdom, I don't believe these monsters alone could change the outcome of the war." Taking a deep breath, Seville also calmed down. He cautiously assessed the situation. In fact, his best judgment for Eryxis was only to hold out for 7 days. But now, they have undoubtedly accelerated this process. This city is already on the verge of collapsing. If that's the case, please stay close to me. On the city walls, soldiers from both nations were engaged in close combat, with the sounds of killing ringing nearby. However, the female priest ignored this, as she was not here to defend the city. "Let's watch a little longer. If the respected goddess of agriculture does not plan to do something, I will take you away." 3 demons, although they seemed large, actually didn't amount to much. This is a typical grass-cutting tool, merely a prop for renown in the eyes of any slightly powerful person. As the last crystal stone was placed into the body of the 3rd giant beast, Solomon breathed a sigh of relief. Having followed Hermes for so long, he had a rough idea of what his teacher was doing. Although he wasn't very clear about the final goal, he understood the process. Hermes wanted these crystal stones to come to life, but not with their original consciousness. He hoped what would come to life would be a group of tools that could be manipulated and deceived, and at least until he achieved his certain goal, these revived beings had to temporarily obey his commands. Solomon didn't know what these crystal stones originally were or what Hermes intended to do with them. He only knew that during the attempt to awaken these crystal stones, Hermes encountered various difficulties. The most critical issue was that if the soul power transferred was too little, it could not accept the amalgamation with the pre-existing will. If too much, it would be identified by the crystal stone's innate recognition as an enemy rather than something that could be assimilated and absorbed. Left with no choice, Hermes had to make a final preparation, which was a blood sacrifice. If the soul power was too little, unable to accept amalgamation, then let it maintain a state of losing some and then replenishing some until it was successful. Previously, due to a shallow understanding of souls, Hermes was unable to achieve this continuous supplementation of soul power. But as he discovered the blood sacrifice of nature spirits and some deep connections between soul and body, this issue seemed to be temporarily alleviated. It seems the people of Eryxis think these are war giant beasts? Perhaps. Only these were inherently sacrifices, merely maximized in this sacrificial process as war weapons while simultaneously turning the lives they took into part of the sacrifice. Reaching out his hand, he pulled out a vial of silver liquid from somewhere. Solomon dripped it into the bodies of the 3 giant beasts, then finally breathed a sigh of relief. The blood sacrifice naturally also solved the problem, but consequently, if that bit of soul continuously received blood sacrifice during the assimilation process, it was very likely to be tainted with some undesirable natures, such as a love for flesh or inherently cruel and so on. Thus, to drive them, it was no longer possible to use ordinary methods, but rather one needed to attach a leash beforehand. Fortunately, the silver liquid in his hand was a form of this leash. It would become a part of the new consciousness during the process of the blood sacrifice. Chapter 773 Demon. Boom! Under the towering city walls, soldiers advanced like strands of dark threads. But atop the walls, Eryxis's defenses had already become loose and chaotic. This was not only due to the obvious disparity in strength between the 2 sides, but also because of the demons stepping on the ground, gradually approaching the wall. The demons were dead, but their carcasses themselves were the most terrifying weapons. And looking across Eryxis, they lacked the heroes needed to counter them. Thus, as had been said before the battle, a probing attack had directly turned into a true siege. Roar! Boom! Without any pattern, the first to approach the wall was a monster with a human body and eagle wings. It was surrounded by vapor, as it seemed to originally dwell in the ocean. Perhaps in its lifetime, this sea monster, suspected of carrying the bloodline of the father of monsters, could stir up waves and storms. But now it could only use its body as a weapon, crashing into the towering walls. Ah, save me.
No.
Die, monster. In that instant, screams and roars erupted one after another, and the divine arts of the priests no longer seemed powerless against the enemy's formations. Against this life form that was not human, dozens of divine arts imbued with sacred power instantly tore into it, as copious amounts of blood surged out like it was free. One could imagine, had the wounded been a living creature, it probably would have recoiled. But unfortunately, the dead know no fear. As a disposable tool, Solomon had no intention of cherishing their use. These three were alien beasts that the former king and I once killed together in the ocean. They are somewhat lacking on land. Otherwise, even though they are already dead, they should still be instinctively manipulating the waves. Watching the distant walls, Solomon sensed blood energy surging from all directions toward the beast. Every soldier slain contributed a fraction of their strength, regardless of which side they were on. The monster with a human body and eagle wings led the charge, followed closely by the mermaid-like sea monster carcasses. In the face of these giants, each hundreds of arms in size, humans indeed seemed very small. For a moment, Solomon was inspired. If he could create steel statues of similar magnitude, letting them rampage across the battlefield with impervious bodies. Such a force, what nation in the world could withstand it? That won't work. The technical challenges are still too great. Shaking his head, Solomon's eyes first sparkled with enthusiasm. Then he let go of the idea. A steel statue like the demon, setting aside how it would move, how it would be powered. Just the materials involved would be an astronomical figure. Perhaps someone in the future could achieve it, but at least for now, such a demon giant was impossible to create. Boom! The ground underfoot seemed to tremble slightly. Solomon looked up. It turned out that the leading demon carcass, ignoring its increasingly numerous wounds, had directly scaled the wall. It tumbled into the city, commencing its final rampage of destruction. Of course, unsurprisingly, it would never return. It seems everything is going smoothly. With the demon having recklessly opened the first breach, the following soldiers naturally climbed the ladders to assault the wall. No one thought Eryxis could hold out for long. The only real concern was whether the deities might decide to cause some trouble here. So, watching the fierce battle atop the walls, Lane thought everything had already ended. But to his surprise, a familiar yet strange fluctuation suddenly emerged from the center of the city. Everything is going smoothly. Lane smiled briefly, having distinguished the sensation, confirmed it as the essence of the abyss. It might be Hera, or perhaps Aphrodite, who knows? But in any case, they probably didn't quite understand. While abyssal beings indeed revel in destruction and killing, at the top of their list of hated enemies are always the gods of order. But who can say for sure? Perhaps they understood the consequences, but the goddess of agriculture herself was also part of their calculations. Thud! Step, step. Pacing restlessly inside the temple, Demeter was somewhat perturbed. The cries of battle from outside the city had long since penetrated inside, and she also noticed Aphrodite's departure. She knew she likely wouldn't receive any support, but she still harbored a strange hope and wishful thinking. What if, just what if Eryxis withstood the assault? Thus, she allowed her priests to join the defense, but did not go herself. On the other hand, even if the city was breached, since she hadn't acted and stayed as a true god in the temple, those Athenians probably wouldn't dare to do anything to her, would they? Uncertain yet unwilling to leave. Because Demeter knew if she wasn't here, there would be no what if. It would be a certainty. So like a gambler, even when faced daily with decline or failure, he would not choose to let go because of the sunk costs. Yet he still had that bit of a bottom line, not willing to sacrifice everything. And so, Demeter had declined Hera's request, refusing to use her authority to affect Athens' harvest. Even so, her inner struggle intensified. Taking a deep breath, she swung the scepter in her hand and forcefully flicked the cups on the table to the ground. Smack! The sound of shattering cups and the screams from outside complemented each other, slightly easing the frustrations of destruction. No matter what, all she could do was wait. Mere mortals, with the example of Sisyphus right before their eyes. Did they really dare to confront the deities? No, they did not dare. Perhaps Theseus would have, but he had long perished because of it. Boom! Who? Who is there? Whoosh! Suddenly turning around, Demeter's expression changed drastically. Just now, a formidable force had struck her temple. The next moment, a somewhat fiery breath came from the outside, occasionally mixed with some irritating odors. At the same time, another kind of mental impact hit her face-on, just like Aphrodite's desire that enchanted all beings. Crack! 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 Boom! First came a harsh sound, followed by a loud noise. The dome of the temple was torn apart. Looking up, what appeared before Demeter was a life form she had never seen before. A pair of bat wings flapped behind it, flames flickering in its blood-red eyes. Its tail dragged behind, yet its hands bore the claw marks of a wild beast. Somewhat familiar from the extravagant appearance of the life form before her, Demeter seemed to recognize some features she had seen not long before. It was Aphrodite's rebellious divine descending bearer, Amazon Queen Hippolyta. But now, the force emanating from the other's body was no less powerful than during the divine descending. And this force also seemed so alien to the world. This is, how dare you? At this moment, Demeter realized what was about to happen. Instinctively, she flew up into the air, trying to get away from the location, avoiding the battlefield. However, being the goddess of agriculture, speed was not her strong suit. Then, with a slight flapping of its bat wings, the demon, with only desire and destruction in its eyes, approached her. Flames enveloping its body started burning all around. Although they could not kill a deity, they could still destroy palaces and buildings. Even standing outside the city, one could clearly see the sky-high blaze. Aphrodite, knowing it had absolutely something to do with the counterpart, but Demeter now truly had no way out. Because the opposing intention was clear, did she think she could keep her temple and not participate in this war? Impossible. If you want to hide, Aphrodite will first destroy your shelter. Would Demeter, infuriated by events, possibly defect to the side of Athens? Even less likely. The conflict between the goddess of agriculture and the goddess of beauty was her loss. Her conflict with Athens was to Athens' disadvantage. Would you rather plead for reconciliation with a mortal who has sworn to kill your father? Or would you drop the conflict and continue to stand with Olympus? Boom! Without a moment to think, the demon's attack followed immediately. Demeter found that perhaps because it had taken on other powers, the life form before her was being repelled by the world, and its thoughts were not that clear. If enough time passed, perhaps it would be expelled from this present world. Or maybe regain its sanity and have the possibility of communication. But in any case, before that happened, Eryxis would likely be destroyed. During this siege, no other power could help Demeter kill this monster. The vast city was doomed to become a sea of fire. Aphrodite, you are too excessive. The golden wand of maize flickered with a greenish glow, struggling to resist the burning flames. At this moment, Demeter felt like she was back to a long time ago when she first arrived in Eryxis. Back then, there was no church of agriculture, and she was bringing the first winter to the mortal realm. And back then, just like now, she was backed into a corner. Whichever direction she took, it was a joke. Boom! A massive explosion, seemingly from the place where food was stored in the city, exploded in the flames. Watching the once prosperous city turned into ruins, watching her rare traces in the mortal realm turn to ash. In that instant, Demeter seemed to make a decision. Aphrodite, just you wait. Swoosh! Leaping up, Demeter glanced at the city about to be breached far away, and she turned to leave. There was no longer any need to stay here, but Aphrodite, do you think you have one? You cannot win. Since you are so ruthless, I will make sure you are ridiculed, both in heaven and on earth. Having no capability to retaliate against others, Demeter knew, and she knew Aphrodite knew too. But what no one knew was, likewise here, in that heavy snow, there was a promise left by her side. Chapter 774. the real person shot by arrow. The city gates had already been breached, the rear ranks held their position, and the front ranks entered the city. Outside the city of Eryxis, watching the golden shadow that shot up from the ground and the red figure that chased after it, Lane calmly ordered. Thus, the army outside the city immediately split into two and pressed toward the walls that no longer had the strength to resist. The last person who could have possibly affected the outcome of the war had left, though staying would have been meaningless. After all, this was Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, with her power assisted by Divine, who might have had some fighting strength relying on her ability to lift bricks and hurl them. But when power was limited to the same level, even the deities of the underworld, never regarded by the Olympian gods, could probably hang and beat this one of the 12 principal gods. The true gods with weak divine power, such as Iris, the goddess of the rainbow, and the gods of the north wind, east wind, and southern wind, could easily defeat Demeter in the mortal realm, which purely justified why she was not esteemed by other deities. Aphrodite was so unbridled precisely for this reason, because she did not need to worry about the consequences. Indeed, your prepared weapons of war indeed have some unique aspects. The massive stone gates were pulled open, the ground still stained with traces of blood. Entering the city of Eryxis, Lane came to the side of the fallen behemoth's corpse. Runes invisible to the naked eye twinkled on the skin, threads of red essence gathering from the surroundings. The war had already ended, but the sacrifice was still ongoing. This is all the work of my teacher. I am just an operator. And it seems Eryxis also had internal turmoil. Their defeat was inevitable. Solomon explained calmly, not taking credit. As expected, the result of this blood sacrifice was a success. Apart from the newly born consciousness possibly being slightly affected in form by these demons, everything went smoothly. Yet, watching Lane before him, a flicker of an unusual light passed through the bottom of his eyes. The sacrificial ritual was not some high-end mystical technique. Although Hermes had tried his best to conceal the alchemy runes, it was still quite easy to spot. Solomon did not know the origins of this man who had suddenly appeared in Athens and was profoundly trusted by Andrea, nor whether he had noticed anything. Perhaps the former king knew something, maybe his teacher too. At least for Solomon, he remained vigilant while harboring a trace of inquiry. Exceptional wisdom is humanity's most precious treasure, a proverb propagated by the Church of Knowledge, and Solomon deeply agreed with it. No matter what, you indeed did well. The effects of alchemy also opened my eyes. With a slight smile, Lane looked at the city burning before him. The wails and cries rose and fell, but clearly, neither he nor Solomon cared about these. Do you desire anything as a reward for your efforts? This. Stunned for a moment, Solomon did not understand the intention of the man before him, but he still instinctively declined. I am only here to complete the task arranged by my teacher, and serving Athens is also my duty. Yes, well, I understand your loyalty to Athens. Then let's put it another way, Solomon. Do you face any difficulties? The smile remained as Lane continued. In fact, I have always been interested in alchemy, but it also faces many limitations, such as thoughts, soul, changing space, distorting reality. These are currently beyond its capabilities. It currently serves only as an auxiliary to the extraordinary system, not the mainstream. Even your teacher first became a wizard before pursuing research in alchemy. The stone from other mountains can carve jade, which shows that problems insoluble in the field of alchemy might be solvable through other means. Falling silent, Solomon became cautious. But looking at the body of the gigantic beast before him, he thought it over and felt there was no need to keep refusing. Perhaps the other party had indeed noticed the ongoing ritual and thus spoke to probe. Then he might as well accept. Regardless of what he said, he would not implement it himself. In that case, Lord Avon, I indeed have some doubts. All creatures have emotions, and they express their own feelings through joy, anger, sorrow, and happiness. Just like this city, where soldiers are fighting each other and flames are destroying swathes of homes. Pain, anger, hatred spread among people, bringing forth all kinds of loves and hates. Adjusting his expression, Solomon sincerely asked, "In your view, sir, are emotions innate or acquired? If they are innate, then what kind of emotions do newly born souls possess? And are these emotions truly the most authentic emotions of humans? If it is acquired, for life, are emotions a help or a shackle?" Half the question was asked casually, the other half influenced by the surroundings. This doubt arose in Solomon when he sensed that consciousness, gradually infected by bloodlust, becoming violent and bloodthirsty. One of the goals of alchemy is purity, but what really constitutes purity? If a strand of a mortal soul is assimilated by a true God and becomes part of him, has that soul been sublimated or polluted? Emotions are probably acquired. As to whether they are helpful, I can't be certain. Without experimentation, there is no basis for conclusion, but I do know of a special witchcraft that can collect emotions dissipated from life. Solomon's question carried undertones of philosophical debates about human nature and divinity that would come later. At the moment, Lane was unable to provide a definitive answer. But that wasn't his intention. He wanted to see if this uniquely named individual was merely coincidental or truly special. He knew the name Solomon was essential in many legends of later ages. If, in this unruptured present, fate held any sway, then the other party must have something special about them. I hope it will be of help to you. You needn't decline. It's just a lesser-known witchcraft after all. Handing over a book, Lane then strode forward. The matters of this city I leave for you to resolve. I will leave a few soldiers here. The rest will depart in 2 days to meet the challenges from all countries in the west of Athens. Whoosh! Thud! A pale golden halo traced across the sky, soon landing on an unnamed hill. Demeter looked somewhat disheveled but quickly regained her poise. She had been unable to shake off the demon chasing her during her journey. Quite the opposite, under the demon's wings, she was chased a great distance. Fortunately, demons seemed naturally rejected by the order of the mortal realm, and she was ultimately expelled from this timeline. Despite not knowing where the demon was now, Demeter finally breathed a sigh of relief. Who? Demophon. Her expression fluctuating, the prince of Athens, who carried betrayal, reminded the goddess of agriculture of her foster son of the same name. He was meant to achieve immortality through fire, yet due to mortal folly, he could not escape his fateful death. Had there been no misfortune, perhaps he, extraordinary by birth, could have risen as a renowned demigod hero. Sadly, reality harbors no ifs. The old Demophon had died, killed by her own hand. The queen's expression of despair and agony was still vivid in her mind, but Demeter harbored no regrets. Mortals are ignorant. Nothing surprising about that. The only regret was that Eryxis was now lost from her hands. There will be better futures. Just a city with memories I'd rather forget. Perhaps this is for the best. From now on, I will have better. Comforting herself, Demeter took out a slender stick of incense. It was crafted using a method left to her by 2 gods with weak but strangely authoritative divine power. Myrrh, orris, and styrax in 4 parts and 2 parts respectively. A part of cedar and ginger with half parts of cardamom, cinnamon, juniper berries, iris flower, and balsam trees, plus 7 properly dried raisins, a few drops of grape wine, honey, and lotus fragrance. Depending on chronology and ritual, they were handled differently. The herbs crushed, left in a sealed container for 2 weeks to mix with essential oils, wine, grapes, then again left silent. After a month of waiting, the final incense was thus made. Your promise to me, the power to twist the spirit and will of gods. The emotional power of mortals only allows gods to briefly wallow. But hatred and pain originating from a god can truly bind another god, even if it's not forever. She reached out and lit the incense in front of her. The sky had already darkened. It was already afternoon when Athens reached Eryxis. In the faint light, Demeter wore no look of hatred. Instead, there was a hint of anticipation. Don't disappoint me. Come see me soon. This time, I will completely rid myself of the past shame. Chapter 775. Prisoner. In the night, atop the hill, specially made incense burned slowly. The smoke wafted through the air, dispersing and gathering to form various shapes. It seemed as if confined by some mysterious force. All the smoke was constrained within a certain range. Whenever it drifted to a certain height, the smoke would vanish into thin air, as though disappearing into another space. Suppressing her unease, Demeter was certain that the smoke before her was not affected by any supernatural powers, yet it still exhibited this peculiarity. Thus, eliminating other possibilities, the reason for this phenomenon could only be one. Indeed, just as you think. These are the rules. Snap! The smoke dispersed, transforming into an illusory portal. As the two voices, still somewhat juvenile, followed one after the other, Volos and Eros stepped through the door in succession. However, much to Demeter's surprise, just like the first time she saw them, the two mysterious deities before her were still around the ages of 11 or 12. Time seemed to be frozen upon them, as if they were unable to grow up. Their current appearance was their true form as deities, and there was no way to change that. Don't be so surprised. The purest love and hatred are often born at this age. The younger children don't understand, and the older ones inevitably become tainted with all sorts of distracting thoughts. A deity's true form is often influenced by their domain and mindset. You should be very clear about this. With her eyebrows slightly raised, Eros spoke faintly, as if she could read minds. And beside her, Volos followed suit. Speak. In accordance with our agreement, we have always had an arrow ready for you. Tell us your target, no matter who, and we will fulfill it for you. After that, there will be no further connection. Without the slightest excess of emotion, as if dealing with an utterly ordinary mundane object. The twins' attitude was so aloof, yet Demeter didn't feel offended. Even with just a few short encounters, the goddess of agriculture had come to understand their temperament. If Aphrodite's disdain was personal only towards her, then the twins' contempt was directed at everyone. It wasn't a deliberate target, and there was no special treatment even for themselves. This sensation was somewhat similar to that of the goddess of the nether moon, whom she had only seen a few times. The first encounter was indeed somewhat uncomfortable, but once accustomed to it, it didn't seem so difficult to accept. All right. Seeing the twins summoned by the agreement so straightforward, Demeter managed a smile and asked, "In that case, I'll speak frankly. I do indeed need an arrow for you to fulfill our agreement. But first, I want to know, what is the limit of your power?" "There are no limits, at least not in terms of your needs." With the corners of her mouth slightly upturned, Eros smiled and said, "However, you know that our arrows are extraordinary because of vengeance, and powerful because of hatred. With your strength and your hatred, an arrow you shoot can only bind beings of the true God's domain. If you're aiming for your divine king, I can only say it's useful, but not as much as you might think. Of course, if you really want to challenge yourself, I won't stop you." "Let's not, then." Shaking her head, the goddess was somewhat disappointed. If Eros and Volos's arrows could bind great divine power, then Demeter would be laughing even in her dreams. However, receiving such an answer wasn't a surprise. That kind of qualitative leap in domains ultimately wasn't something that could be easily crossed. Or in other words, if they truly could break such limits so effortlessly, then she herself should indeed be feeling fear instead. "Then, you two, I have another question." Her gaze flickering, Demeter asked again, "Is the emotion stirred by your arrows different from person to person?" Of course, twisting the will of a true god is very difficult, but amplifying some emotions is a lot easier. Volos nodded at her words, and Eros added, "Like your target of hatred right now, Aphrodite. Her belt is such a divine artifact, stirring up desires in the hearts of people. For those brimming with desire and without restraint, its might is unparalleled. Otherwise, it's not that useful. Do you understand?" "Of course I understand." Nodding once more, her thoughts became even clearer. Demeter looked up at the exquisitely lifelike twins. naive and full of curiosity, loving jokes yet lacking in propriety. If not witnessed with her own eyes, which of the Olympian gods would believe that such a deity possessed this divine authority? Fortunately, the one now qualified to use this arrow was herself. You too, I have made my decision. I want a golden arrow. I want the person struck by the arrow to love me forever, or at least for 1,000 years. Can you do that? Understood. So who's your target? With a twist of her mouth, seeing her lead arrow not having a chance to be used, Eros appeared somewhat disheartened. However, Demeter's next words made her mouth drop open in shock. Athena. Ah. X2. What did you say? X2. I said, my target is Athena. Repeating herself, although her voice was calm, Demeter struggled to suppress the triumph in her words. You've been putting on this attitude in front of me day after day. Now you too are stunned, right? You this. The scene fell silent for a moment. Just as Demeter had thought, both Volos and Eros were indeed astonished. Chapter 776. Prisoner_2. You should know that the moment the incense was lit, the moment the fog, heavy with grief and resentment, reached their vicinity, the twins had already gleaned some understanding of Demeter's recent situation. The resentment, the frustration. Therefore, they had many ideas before they even arrived, and had even made bets on how she planned to recover it all. Make Aphrodite fall in love with a Hecatonchires? Turn the desirable Apollo, whom even the goddess of beauty couldn't obtain, into a subject under Demeter's skirt? These were all possibilities, and indeed they were clever strategies. But they could never have imagined that they would hear the name of a goddess, and that goddess would be Athena. How so? Is there a problem with what I said? I remember Athena doesn't possess great divine power, and there was no mention that your arrows can't be used by goddesses. Smiling, Demeter felt immensely satisfied. Goddess Athena, symbol of wisdom. When her name was spoken, Demeter couldn't help but acknowledge the surpassing intelligence that is indeed the most precious treasure of life. A treasure not exclusive to the goddess of wisdom. Yes, that's right, just as the twins guessed. She was planning to find a pillar of support for herself. Someone strong, capable, willing to work for her, and who didn't understand love as possession, like Poseidon. In fact, Apollo was a very good choice. Demeter still acknowledged the character of this nephew of hers. However, thinking of Apollo, considering this deity whose appearance was acknowledged by both men and women, the goddess of agriculture suddenly had a brilliant idea. Indeed, who dictated that love must be between a male god and a goddess, or a goddess and a male god? Not to mention anyone else, her brother Zeus was an example. Recently, his affair with a certain mortal lad had been widely discussed in the divine court, and even rumors said that the divine king planned to grant the youth immortality, to replace Hebe as the cupbearer for all gods. Although so far it was merely gossip, Demeter couldn't help but consider other possibilities given these precedents. Furthermore, on Olympus, the amount of morally bound male deities was limited. Goddesses were far more abundant. Under such circumstances, once a change of heart occurred, the world seemed broader. It was not that Apollo was lacking in any way. Choosing Athena simply appeared as a boundless horizon for Demeter. So, this is my request. Smiling in response, Demeter even analyzed. The troubles I face now are related to both Athens and Olympus. In the past, I was partly to blame for Theseus's death. Under these circumstances, even if I'm willing to lean towards Athens, the outcome might not be favorable. I am not certain if she will settle scores after fall, nor if Athena will trust me. But now, a single arrow could resolve all these problems. Therefore, that is my request. I hope you can fulfill it for me. Eh? Feeling a bit awkward, Volos had already brought out a golden arrow, but under the gaze of the goddess of agriculture, he retracted his hand a little. Shooting Athena, isn't that a bit too fierce? It wasn't impossible, but Athena was a bit special. Therefore, even they were unclear what the outcome might be once the arrow was shot. Cough, Demeter, on this matter, we hope that you will give it careful consideration. After a moment's hesitation, Volos explained, it's not that we can't fulfill your request, but wisdom indeed has the upper hand in repressing such emotions. Furthermore, although I have no idea what the goddess has been doing lately, the impression she left on me during a chance encounter over 100 years ago was even more formidable than the Lord of Ocean. So what you are saying is, you can't fulfill your promise? Taken aback, Demeter didn't expect her flawless plan to face an obstacle before it even began. Faced with her inquiry, Volos had no choice but to explain, "It's not impossible, but the result is rather unpredictable. We agreed to shoot an arrow for you, but the consequences should always be clearly stated beforehand. Athena is indeed not a good choice." Feeling somewhat unwilling, but Demeter had no alternative. After all, as they said, they promised an arrow but did not promise the outcome. If something really went wrong, she doubted that the twins would offer after-sales service. With no other choice, given the best option was gone, Demeter fell into thought for a moment. Should she choose Apollo instead? She'd rather not. Besides Athena, she wished to avoid choosing any gods likely to be involved in the Battle of Athens. Moreover, the most important point was that although Apollo was powerful, on one hand he had no factions of his own, and on the other hand he had his duties with the sun chariot. So this really wasn't a good choice. Demeter just wanted to retaliate against Aphrodite and then slip away. The starry sky, the underworld, choose one. These are the only two safest places. But the underworld belongs to Pearl, and ever since marrying Hades last time, it seems she has become quite estranged from me. Shaking her head, thinking this, Demeter looked up at Volos. Well then, as you said, in that case I will make another choice. This time, I hope there will be no more problems. There won't be. Among all the gods there aren't so many exceptions. Breathing a sigh of relief, she recalled the gods she knew within the scope of her knowledge. Volos was sure there were no more exceptions. Even if this time she chose Hera, it wouldn't be a problem. But to get back to the point, I should warn you in advance. Arrows that involve desire must be forged with your heart's blood, filled with hatred. Demeter, are you ready? Of course. If for others, their hatred was toward a particular person, and thus their blood-drenched arrows could only affect their enemies. For Demeter, her hatred was less about Aphrodite and more about her own situation, her thirst for power and status. So without hesitation, she took the golden arrow from Volos's hand and plunged it into her chest. And when a deity with great divine power sacrifices her blood for an arrow, this originally brilliant divine artifact inevitably lost its luster. Red patterns spread upon it. Some lost power from the world stirred and began to slowly converge. Tisk, decisive now, aren't we? With a sneer, Eros brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Will she get what she desires? Perhaps. She might. As voices faded into nothing, in this profound night, the golden arrow symbolizing desire was forged once again. The next day, in the city of Eryxis, Lane surveyed the ruined temple. The power of the abyss still lingered above, and Lane was somewhat surprised by Aphrodite's quiet association with the abyss. Of course, his reason for visiting the place today had nothing to do with the abyss. That was a matter for the serpent of the central court, not his. The reason Lane came was actually because of a person who had just been arrested here. According to your investigation, he's not a guard of Eryxis, but he was skulking near the Temple of Agriculture. Lane asked as he browsed through the data obtained after a short interrogation. On a power level, suspected to be a high-ranking professional, but did not resist arrest. Is that correct? Yes. Solomon nodded slightly. Then his name, and why did he come here? With a strange expression, Lane asked again. Even though he had been informed by the messenger earlier, Solomon found it odd that he was being asked again, yet he replied, supposedly, he came to rescue a trapped goddess. That's his mission, and the mission's objective is to save the goddess of agriculture from the clutches of the evil Athenians. But as you know, we haven't captured the goddess of agriculture at all. As for his name, after a moment of thought, Solomon affirmed, though it is a bit strange and does not conform to the usual naming conventions. But according to his own account, He indeed calls himself Heracles without a doubt. Chapter 777 Witness. Swish swish. In the city of Eryxis, not far from the temple, a tall young man stood up, paced a few steps, then sat back down in his place. The small room had been temporarily converted into a prison, and the chains on his hands clinked as he moved. The young man noticed that his every move was being watched closely by the soldiers around him. Their gazes were cautious, and also filled with dread. It was as though they weren't facing a young man, but a ferocious beast unleashed by a flood. I should have been more careful, otherwise I wouldn't have gotten into this kind of trouble. He sighed internally, feeling a bit regretful. But in truth, he knew he wasn't adept at concealing his movements. And more confusing to him than being caught was the purpose of his journey. Where had the goddess of agriculture gone? What happened to her promise of not giving up her sacred land in the mortal realm, her decision to stay in Eryxis? And then there were the arrogant and presumptuous Athenians. Heracles had thought he would witness them assaulting the deity's sanctuary. Yet, perhaps because the goddess of agriculture herself had abandoned this place, not only had Athens' army done nothing to the temple, but they also joined in the efforts to put out the fire. The demon fire, infused with the essence of the abyss, was hard to extinguish, but it had been easily dealt with in the presence of these Athenians. Thus, for a moment, Heracles, who had just received a significant blow in his life, felt lost. According to the guidance he had received, he had committed a crime that was unforgivable. Therefore, he needed to demonstrate his extraordinary power and wisdom to the gods. Preventing the Athenians from attacking the goddess of agriculture's temple was one of the tasks. Whether through words or force, as long as he could convince the Athenian army to spare the temple and not attempt to imprison the goddess of agriculture, that would be considered a successful completion of the mission. But now, it seemed like he had succeeded without needing to do anything. After all, from beginning to end, the Athenians didn't seem to show any interest in a temple without a deity. Actually, this result doesn't seem too bad. But if the goddess of agriculture wasn't even here to begin with, did I truly complete my mission? After all, I haven't even seen the face of the goddess up until now, let alone assisted her. Swish swish. Standing up again, he paced morosely and the chains rattled ominously. Previously, while trying to further ascertain the whereabouts of the goddess of agriculture, Heracles was spotted by patrolling soldiers. They seemed to think he was some kind of dangerous element, and thereupon imprisoned him on the spot. Heracles did not resist as compared to this task, which was nothing like what the gods had described. He cared little for being imprisoned. After all, neither these shackles nor the soldiers posed any threat to Heracles. If he wished, he could leave this place at any time. But what really made him choose to stay was he had heard that among the military's high ranks was a potent alchemist. Wizards may not necessarily be alchemists, but in this era, an alchemist was certainly a wizard. And to the western kingdoms of the mainland, wizards were seen as evil but wise, knowledgeable, and eager to explore the unknown. And for Heracles at this time, he wanted to converse with a being of vast knowledge, so he simply allowed himself to be imprisoned. "Ha! Are they coming?" He exhaled, and after a short while, Heracles' keen senses picked up someone approaching the makeshift prison. Sure enough, the high ranks of this army had taken notice of him, and that was why he had made no effort to conceal the purpose of his mission. Heracles was not a brute. On the contrary, he was rather intelligent. In the original myths, that's just the kind of person he was. The 12 labors weren't always completed by brute strength, so since the gods hadn't required him to keep his labors a secret, attracting the attention of the Athenians like this was not out of the question. Clang! The door was flung open, and someone stepped in. An officer, who appeared to have some rank, gave Heracles a once-over, then motioned with his hand. "You are Heracles?" "I am." Nodding in response, Heracles scrutinized this seemingly slightly stronger, yet still fragile officer. "Since it's you, come with us. Someone wants to see you. To save the goddess. You really thought that one up." Slightly disdainful, but the officer tried not to show it. He ordered the locks on Heracles to be opened and then signaled for him to follow and leave. As for the possibility of the prisoner resisting after being unchained, what a joke. Impossible, even those world-renowned heroes wouldn't be able to move freely amidst a national conflict and a large army. Yes, absolutely impossible. Feeling confident in his judgment, and having confirmed there was no mistake in the person, the officer turned and led the way. Step, step, step. Within the empty temple, footsteps approached from afar. Lane stood not far from a fallen statue, the aftermath of the previous battle, admiring the exquisite frescoes on the dome of the temple. There was no denying that the presence of extraordinary power had advanced the art of this era considerably, especially this kind of bas-relief architecture, which was far superior in skill to anything else from the same period. The entire fresco was exquisite and dignified, depicting the history of the Church of Agriculture. All those pivotal figures in the development of the church were there, their last traces left in the mortal realm. Chapter 778 Witness _2. Stomp. The footsteps stopped not far behind, diverting attention away from the mural. Lane turned slightly. Before him stood a tall and robust youth, his eyes lively. Like sculptures of the ancient Greek deities, he embodied a masculine beauty. Heracles, the criminal? It was a rhetorical question, or perhaps a reaffirmation. Yet the youth did not take offense. After all, he was nameless in this world. But I am not a criminal. Since coming to this city, I have not violated any of Athens's laws. Or do you mean that, by your rules, any foreigner present in Eryxis is a criminal? Heracles seemed irritated by the key word, criminal. He could not deny the crime of patricide, even though he himself did not understand why he had committed it. Other than that, he would admit to no wrongdoing not his own. Is that so? So you think that if you have not made a mistake, you are not a criminal, and you should not be punished? Isn't that the case? Heracles retorted, but Lane just smiled and pointed to the mural at the dome of the temple. Have you heard of the history behind the establishment of the Church of Agriculture? Of course. Despite not remembering every church's history, the fame of the Eryxis secret rite meant stories of the Church of Agriculture were widespread. Naturally, Heracles knew about it, a tale that asserted the greatness of the deity and the ignorance of mortals. That being the case, Heracles, the self-proclaimed guiltless hero, let me ask you, since you know the story about the deceased prince, the goddess that brought storms, each person's fate, what do you think their sins were? Lane faced him with a serene smile, speaking neither rushed nor slow. The queen who lost her child, the dead prince, the goddess who gave birth to children from the divine king's violation. They may all have done wrong, but it was before disaster struck them. After they actually committed their atrocities, they faced no punishment. So what then determines the establishment of punishment and crime? Because these acts are indeed unjust. But the king is the definer of order. Heracles furrowed his brow. Such querying had explanations in this era. Not everyone may accept this reasoning, but it was a perspective all the same. They can dictate whether an act is criminal, then both he and others will abide. The divine king did not decree violation by gods as a crime. The king did not decree the killing of mortals by gods as a crime. So their subsequent actions are naturally not considered sinful. So in your eyes, if the law doesn't deem an act criminal, even if it goes against the morals, customs of the world, against your own beliefs, it doesn't warrant punishment? Interrupting, Lane did not actually know why this version of Heracles had to undergo trials. In the original story, he committed the great sin of infanticide due to Hera's instigation, but the present Heracles should have no children. However, the methods of the gods are limited, so even without clarity, there likely wouldn't be much difference. Yes. Nodding in agreement, Heracles asserted, since the rules don't dictate, then, he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. At that moment, the youth realized a problem, because it seemed he was the same. He had indeed committed the sin of patricide. However, classical-era laws often varied by state and circumstance. Moreover, while people often established rules after a wrongdoing to make amends, they seldom learned from one case to prevent others. Hence, after Tantalus, mortals only considered killing one's child a major sin, without stipulating other similar behaviors. Of course, it might also be due to the fact that throughout history, divine kings were often persecuted in the son's position before retaliating with a son slaying the father. In terms of the law, Heracles was actually innocent. But that did not mean he could convince himself, as at the same time, people of this era did not hold such a high regard for the laws as one might imagine. Just as in later dynasties, like the Han, when a commoner killed another to avenge his father, the officials and the public would often praise rather than consider it an offense. The more classical the era, the more morality outweighed the law. Therefore, even though he had not violated the law, Heracles still admitted his wrongdoing from the bottom of his heart. Well, you're right. I admit that errors are not solely confined to the breaches of the law, but what exactly are you trying to convey by telling me this? Looking at the lane before him, the young man's expression finally grew stern. In his heart, he had always been proud. Although he seldom showed it, ever since Heracles realized his unique strength at a very young age, he knew he was different from others. Just like his fearless choice to stay in this city occupied by the army, dealing with the army's commander on equal terms was actually a subconscious arrogance. Only now did he truly acknowledge this obscure Athenian. I'm just saying, in your heart, you probably value your own morality more than others' rules, right? But the education you received since childhood told you otherwise. That's why you feel bound by it. Nodding inwardly, Lane watched the young man's reaction before him, certain that his guess was correct. However, since he was still uncertain about what crime the other party had recently committed, he only skimmed the surface and did not delve deeper, opting to change the subject instead. Now, whether you are a criminal or not, young man, I can sense the extraordinary potential within you. You are a very capable person, and your so-called mission, to rescue the trapped goddess of agriculture, no longer exists. So what are you going to do next? Continue on with your so-called mission? Yes, but before that I would like to ask you a question. After all, I have long heard about the wisdom of the Athenians. After a moment of silence, Heracles temporarily set aside the debate about the criminal. He remembered why he had chosen to stay in Eryxis and also recalled the deity who had appeared before him in his moment of agonizing despair. In reality, Heracles thought the timing of the god of the west wind's appearance to be somewhat coincidental, but he was certain that the deity could not influence his mind, not even a principal god with immense divine power. Thus, he had accepted the god's challenge, but he was not as trusting of the wind god's promise. But mortals have their limitations, and even with his inherent great strength, he could not close the gap of understanding with the ancient gods. So he had to place his hopes in Athens, a kingdom renowned for its wisdom and knowledge. A question? By all means, Lane said with a slight arch of his eyebrow, smiling. There's little in this world that I do not know, whether in heaven or on earth or in the past or the future. Of course, seeking knowledge should come at a price. So, what do you want to know, and what are you willing to give up for it? I am here to seek the secrets of resurrection and ways for mortals to avoid death, Heracles said earnestly, his eyes shining brightly. If you can unravel my doubts and help me find the means to accomplish all this, then let the day's sun and moon and the endless stars bear witness. Heracles will certainly repay your kindness, defeating your enemies for you, as long as it does not violate the morals in my heart. Chapter 779. 3 Solutions. The morality within one's heart? Such a self-centered statement. A soft chuckle escaped as Heracles pondered the term before him, Lane silently reading the word. From ancient times to the present, the constraints of so-called morality have always been meant to safeguard against gentlemen, not scoundrels. And Heracles could hardly be called a gentleman, having deceived enemies encountered during his trials in later myths. Of course, he was not a scoundrel either, at least not compared to his father. Therefore, in the absence of events like swearing by the Styx, Lane neither underestimated nor overestimated the promises of Heracles. He merely nodded indifferently, as if accepting the cost. Then, as you wish, O brave warrior from Thebes. You offer up your promise, and in return, I shall tell you the secrets of all things within this palace once inhabited by a deity. You will learn how to extend life, avoid death, and acquire the secret to an existence that endures through the ages. All will remain here, within your heart and mine. The voice echoed within the dilapidated temple, and before Heracles' eyes, Lane raised a hand and made a gesture. The next moment, the dome's mural began to blur. New reliefs replaced the old ones, emerging from shallow to deep, from nothing to something. The sky, earth, and ocean, the star realm, the netherworld, and the abyss. The myriad things of the world appeared in sequence, time condensed within dimensions. A panoramic painting of the fleeting world was unveiled before the young man. Witnessing the scene, Heracles couldn't help but feel there might be some truth to the man's earlier boasts. Whether he knew everything in this world or not, he must surely be one of the rare learned individuals in the mortal realm. What is this? Is this the appearance of the world? But what does this have to do with what I want to know? Heracles inquired, to which Lane responded with a smile. Indeed, this represents the world you inhabit, as well as the myriad realms that stand alongside it. But first, before all began, Heracles, you seek the method of resurrection. But what kind of existence do you wish to resurrect? Is it a trace that has dissipated, long vanished from the world? Or is it a body that has decayed, already moved onto samsara? Or perhaps it died unjustly, and you are unable to retrieve its soul, unable to grant it new life? Different people, naturally, have different solutions. Nothing in this world can traverse all, and neither can the resurrection technique. It is the latter. I need to retrieve the soul of the deceased. Speaking gravely, Heracles hesitated before continuing. In fact, someone once promised me. He claimed that the souls in this world largely hail from the spirit realm, and even the gods struggle to interfere with its workings. But he promised me that if someday I could make my way to the netherworld, following the course of the river of oblivion, if I reached the place that causes all things to undergo samsara, then perhaps he could use the opportunity to find the soul I wish to resurrect. Before this, however, I must first prove my strength and let my name spread throughout all countries. His explanation was very detailed, and although I am willing to believe him, I have never heard of such things before and do not know if they can truly succeed. So, wise sage, please resolve my doubts. Is this method of resurrection truly feasible? Retrieve the soul? Lane's lips twitched slightly, listening to Heracles' story, even though the latter hadn't mentioned that person as a certain god. Lane instantly understood his implications. Similar events had occurred more than once throughout history, and if, as claimed, retrieving the soul from the fourth layer of the spirit realm, that surely wasn't his real goal. In fact, even without verification, Lane didn't believe for an instant that the so-called soul was actually in the spirit realm. It was most likely an excuse, a means to encourage Heracles to voluntarily explore a forbidden zone not even the gods dared enter lightly. This mortal burdened with a unique destiny was not so easily fated to perish. This might be the true intention. Had he not already seen the script, Lane might have inadvertently allowed Heracles to achieve something unforeseen. As for the method you speak of, it might be theoretically feasible, but in reality, it is impossible. Speaking calmly, despite his inferences, Lane did not divulge them outright. After all, these were merely speculations, even if they were highly probable. The destination of souls is indeed the spirit realm, but young warrior, with your power and experience, you should be well aware of how fragile mortal things are. If not on the mortal world, the clash of two deities could turn 1,000 miles to ruins. A mere ripple of divine power could obliterate tens of thousands of souls. Whether the person who promised you has the ability to take a soul from the spirit realm, and whether you can find that specific soul among the myriad, I fear you may not be able to ensure its safety amid fierce battles. However, he continued with a faint smile, if you are not concerned with the likelihood of success but merely seek hope, then such an approach might be permissible. No, I certainly hope to succeed, and I must succeed. Heracles emphasized each word as he gazed at the not-so-robust figure before him. Then, regarding what I seek, do you have a solution? Indeed I do. I have 3 methods that can fulfill your heart's desire. The first is the simplest and most brute force. You should know gods have their world, and humans have theirs. Under the laws of the world, the two are distinctly separate. Gently lifting a hand, the mural on the dome flipped at Lane's fingertips. The stars and mountains grew more prominent, with images flickering therein as if gods were traversing among them. As you see, only in the gods' world are deities invincible. It is not the same in the mortal realm. Just like that goddess of agriculture you were meant to save, you could try to find their vulnerabilities, and upon earth, imprison the gods who come to the mortal realm, forbidding their return to the mount of the gods where they reside. How is that useful? Their use is as bargaining chips for your trade. Calm in expression, as if completely indifferent to the blasphemous words he spoke, Lane said lightly, "It is widely known that the Divine King is the ruler of the present world. This may be somewhat exaggerated, but it does have some truth to it. If you can imprison all gods and force the King of all gods to bow his proud head and listen to the opinions of mortals, then what you want can certainly be achieved. After all, the Divine King is always special, and the things they can use for exchange will never be in short supply." He opened his mouth to speak, but didn't know what to say. At this moment, Heracles felt he understood why the gods shunned spellcasters. Such profane speech, treating deities as goods and trading with the supreme divine king. The teachings he had received were undeniably at odds with this, and yet for some reason, Heracles felt a bit of yearning in his heart. Yes, this was what a truly fearless hero should do. Why should he prove himself to others through trials, and why should he face these hardships? Are deities really that powerful? Then why do they repeatedly retreat because of mortals? If there is anything in this world that stands in my way, then a true hero should make all things comply with his will. Whether it is the gods above or below, if they try to hinder him, they should be crushed one by one. Hey! Ha! And the second one? Within the temple, Lane seemed to hear a heavy breath. However, in the end, Heracles still did not respond directly. Although he was much younger than the one in the original myth who had a family and career, and also much more valiant and fearless, at least at this moment he did not possess the courage and strength to challenge all gods. A gemstone needs to be polished, and so does Heracles. He may be a natural-born strongman, but even this strength has its limits. Compared to the future where he temporarily held up the sky with the strength of a demigod, breaking the bounds of divine persons, he was still much weaker now. The second method, that no longer requires absolute courage and strength, but only your wisdom will suffice. Without taking offense, Lane raised his hand again. The sky and mountains protruding from the dome's mural in the temple were immediately erased, and in the remaining part, the endless netherworld became the new focal point. In front of Heracles, endless darkness and eternal night rose and fell, each tide representing a day and night in the mortal world. Indistinctly, he seemed to see 2 figures hidden in the shadows and moonlight, and every move they made was affecting the changes in the world. Heracles, have you ever heard about the primordial gods? About those deities from the dawn of creation? I've only heard some, such as the rumors about Heavenly Father and Mother Earth. Rumors say they are the ancestors of all gods, possessing strength second only to the Divine King. They are the most ancient of deities and are also incarnations of the world. And perhaps they never truly had their own will, for very few humans have seen their manifestations. Heracles, speaking softly of what he knew, gazed at the mural before him. Clearly, at this time, the records of the old days had already varied, with different city-states and regions each having their own interpretation. Besides Athens, which still recorded some official history, what people from other city-states knew had already been distorted. So the primordial deities do exist, and Heavenly Father and Mother Earth are not all. The existence you've shown me, are they other primordial deities? And can they fulfill my wishes? Yes, but you can't use force to deal with them. With a flick of his index finger, the mural divided. The darkness and eternal night were artificially separated, while Lane explained with a smile. Mother Night, she is the sky before the birth of the sky, the canopy that envelopes the earth. The world manifests nature, causality, and fate through her, while the other lightless divine entity is the reverse side of the earth, a barrier that isolates order and chaos. Each of them can fulfill your wish, for there is little they cannot do in this world. But facing the ancient gods coexistent with the world, what will you offer to move them? You're right. This is a problem that can only be solved with true wisdom, and although I am not foolish, I am also unable to fathom the minds of such ancient gods. The toiling valor that had surged before was temporarily quelled, and Heracles' heart steadied a bit. Perhaps he hadn't even realized it himself, but when he took on the task to save the goddess of agriculture, powerful in divine strength, there was indeed some pride within him. The gods are just that. What bounds me to respect them is only the education I've received. But upon learning that the primordial gods truly exist, the young hero looked up to the earth and the heavens. He did not lose faith, but he also had to admit there were still many beings in this world that could threaten him. Bravery and caution are not contradictory. Perhaps they are inherently one and the same. What about the third method? Unable to achieve the first two, Heracles grew somewhat impatient, but Lane did not leave him hanging. Raising his hand for the third time, the previous images vanished. Now, at the dome of the temple, only the last third of the mural remained. It was an invisible vortex, as if containing all the malice in the world. Although he had never seen it before, at that moment Heracles knew its name. Tartarus, the abyss beneath the underworld. The third method is the simplest. It requires neither your strength nor your wisdom. You just need to be hard-hearted enough. That shouldn't be difficult for you, should it? The voice echoed in the empty temple, stirring ripples of echoes. But to Heracles it sounded like a devil's temptation. Chapter 780. Behind the Seven Veils. Is your heart ruthless enough? What do you mean? Unconsciously looking up, he met Lane's gaze. This time, no one spoke, but invisible messages still emerged in Heracles' mind. The fresco on the dome seemed to have a double image, with a vortex spiraling into existence another opposing stream. In it, Heracles saw life, slaughter, and the flesh. He also saw deceit, lies, and civilization. Above the 9 layers of interface, a king with red pupils and wings perched. In the endless void, the ancient serpent around the central court hissed. In the axis of the 9 layers of interface, Heracles seemed to see a colossal tree growing snake-like. Order and covenant were its branches, and blood and body transformed into the sources of its strength. At that moment, an intuition told Heracles that he could also achieve his goal here, with laws to follow and traces to pursue. This interface hidden in Tartarus did not refuse any mortal's desires, as long as they could pay an equivalent price. Here, it's also harvesting faith and souls. There's nothing strange about that. After all gods harvest with bloodlines and kingdoms. Demons harvest with desires and contracts. Essentially, what's the difference? Lane spread his hands and retorted casually. In fact, with the latter you can refuse, but with the former, as long as you live, you cannot refuse. Like now, the all-gods won't respond to you, but the demons can, so will you refuse? A longer silence than the previous 2 times followed, and Heracles did not know how to deny it. Should he refuse? Of course, he could refuse. But compared to the first 2 methods, the third one was so simple. Killing, sacrificing, accumulating enough price. Not only souls, in fact, the essence of real-world flesh is similarly meaningful to purgatory. After all, the abyss is different from the spirit realm. It is chaotic, but matter exists there too. All he needed was to kill. With Heracles' strength, he could completely become an honored guest of all countries, conducting massacres openly and honorably. Killing the soldiers of enemy nations, exchanging their lives for status and fame, using their blood and souls after death to satisfy his own wishes. What could be wrong with that? Don't the all-gods do the same, collecting everything from mortals before and after death, under the guise of protection?
No.
Startled suddenly, Heracles stepped back. His previous thoughts seemed to turn into actual voices echoing in his ears. He watched Lane intently before him. Was it his doing, or was his own mind unsettled? Heracles did not know, but what he did know was that, indeed, he had been tempted. Now he could refuse, but he did not know whether he could still refuse in the future. So, the third method, you still want to give that up? Hesitant to speak, Heracles wasn't a strictly righteous person. If it were just killing a few people, perhaps he really would have agreed. But to achieve what he wanted, he feared gambling would cause mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Resurrection wasn't difficult. The difficulty was in living without dying. For a mortal to achieve true undying was exceedingly difficult. After all, there were too many things in this world that could take a life of longevity. Even Heracles himself could not ignore the attacks of divine power. If I agree now, perhaps nothing would happen for now. But once I've slaughtered countless lives, would I really still want to pay this price just to resurrect one person? He took a step forward, a golden light emerging in Heracles' eyes. 3 questions, 3 considerations. His divinity at this moment was like a brief and illusory flame ignited. Consumed flesh, bones, spirit, even itself. Something seemed to have been burnt away, yet it seemed like nothing had. But for some reason, Heracles felt much more at ease. Pursuing supreme power. Devouring the wisdom of the wise. A heart cold and ruthless. With the will of Zeus flowing in your veins, you were influenced once, so why not a second time? Lane smiled faintly, even without witnessing. He was certain that the person Heracles wanted to resurrect had ties with Zeus, because the only ones who could influence him were Hera, who had once nurtured him, and Zeus, who gave him divine blood. And a true demigod must always discard these intrinsic influences. Ah, the hero from Thebes, it seems you are not satisfied with any of the 3 methods. You're a picky young man, but no matter, as I've said, there's little in this world I don't know. With a slight struggle, but Lane eventually did not let Heracles down. He lifted his hand one last time, gently touching the dome of the temple. The ephemeral images of Tartarus and Purgatory also disappeared, as if everything in this world ceased to exist. However, feeling the flame gradually extinguishing within, Heracles seemed to see something else. That is, all tangible things were gone, yet the intangible gave birth to existence. Vaguely, in the emptiness of the dome, Heracles felt as if he saw another world. It corresponded remotely with the material realm but contained all possibilities of the universe. What is this? Heracles asked. Standing beside, Lane answered with a smile. It is naturally the last solution you wanted. Since you don't want the first 3, the only path left is for you. You'll head to the real spirit realm. Not smuggling, not carrying anyone's mission, just for what you truly desire. You will travel west, find the correct entrance beneath Mount Othrys that once supported heaven and earth, and then start a grand adventure. Adventure? Yes. His smile still in place, Lane spread his arms as if embracing the world. Old legends say that at the beginning of all things, spirituality and matter were born at the start of everything. Everything in the material world stems from this, and the master of spirituality then lifted the 7 veils, looking down upon the world from the summit in the spirit realm. And if you follow the right path, passing through the veils that the gods have draped among mortals, and finally reach the peak of Mount of the Gods, then whatever your wish may be, it will inevitably be fulfilled. Master of spirituality? Muttering the name to himself, Heracles thought this to be difficult, yet not impossible. He didn't know how to sway an ancient god born at the dawn of creation, but if it was just a matter of meeting, then he felt he could manage it. Moreover, compared to stealing from someone else's home, he preferred to meet the master directly and talk to him. So, gazing at the hallucinatory dome, Heracles earnestly said, "Thank you for your wisdom. If I really can fulfill my wish, I will certainly keep my promise."
Norrus.
With a gentle shake of his head, Lane turned around, his back to the young hero. Before him was the broken statue of Demeter, ironically placed within the temple that once belonged to her. Passing through the 7 layers of spirit realm is no simple feat. Your strength might be sufficient, but your experience, insights, wisdom, and skills are still far from enough. You need to temper yourself, but mere trials aren't enough for perfection. You also need a mentor, someone who can truly help you fill in the gaps. Where can such a person be found then? In the stars, the sea, or among the mountains and the underworld? Just east of Athens, near the center of the sea. Lane slowly paced, his voice taking on a teasing tone. This person meets my requirements, and he will definitely help you. You won't doubt him because you know he won't harm you. As for his name, you've guessed it already, right? Yes, you're right. I guessed it already. There could be no other, atop the East Sea, who fits these criteria. The creator of the bronze humanity, the stealer of heavenly fire, the prescient Titan god. The very Prometheus who remains imprisoned within the sea eye as a warning to the world. Within the shadowy emptiness, the great serpent was slithering. The abyss's temporality is boundless, yet nothing is absolute before the great serpent. In just a few movements, the serpent of the central court arrived at the place nearest to hell and the underworld, then darted forward. The temporal barrier was pierced, and its massive body appeared in the outside world. But it was only for a moment. As power spilled forth, the great serpent returned behind the barrier before several gazes swept across. For the time being, it must not leave the abyss. Fortunately, this was not much of an issue for it. One is all, and all is one. The will of the great serpent existed in every fraction of its power, and the bit that left was no different. Transformed into a pitch-black small serpent, the diminutive incarnation swam through the netherworld. It swam past fire rivers, past the banks of Acheron River. It proceeded to the mortal realm, to the East Sea, to the site of that enormous whirlpool. At the end of the Second Era, another collision between the sun and the sea created this chasm. It resembled the legendary ruins of later times, where all waters sloped yet had no bottom. Yet, being truly within it, mortal beings couldn't grasp its vastness. This mile-spanning whirlpool was so immense that mortals could only think they'd come to an increasingly turbulent part of the ocean. Positioned above the whirlpool, the pitch-black small serpent looked down. However, perhaps because it was a wound caused by the sun, no external light or heat could approach this place. Even knowing that the creator of bronze humanity was locked here, the small serpent couldn't see any related imagery. SSS. Troublesome. Wouldn't it be simpler to just make him my follower? Let him kill and kill in the mortal realm. What if he follows those later rumors and practices, proving Tao by killing? The forked tongue flickered in the air, malignance nearly spilling from the serpent's eyes. Though inherently the same individual, the great serpent didn't necessarily share perspectives with its other aspects. Besides a cohesive self-awareness, the serpent of the central court often had many unique ideas. For instance, it once considered creating a Heracles to subdue the deities. Since he was destined by fate to ascend to godhood, he wouldn't be punished by the laws of the present world. So, imposing himself further through subjugation was quite plausible. After all, he was Zeus' son, and God was tightly knit with law. Subduing a deity might also be seen as subduing the corresponding law. If Heracles eventually subdued everyone, wouldn't he be using a tyrannical approach to gain the right to rule? Perhaps, after the collapse of the divine king's throne, Heracles could inherit Zeus' legacy and become the god of sovereign. Though indeed risky, it's worth a try. It's a pity, really. The snaky head subtly tilted, displaying a human-like expression of regret. It was unclear whether the sorrow was for Heracles not taking this correct path, or for missing out on the shedding of blood. In any case, the serpent of the central court lingered a while but eventually continued to swim downward. Lane told Heracles that he could release Prometheus here, but merely telling would be meaningless because Prometheus was bound by the divine king's authority. Thus, breaking that chain was naturally not so simple. Chapter 781, Bronze Creator. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. at the bottom of the ocean under an endless vortex. In an empty, deathly silent space devoid of any color, the inexplicable sound of dripping water echoed ceaselessly, as if it had never stopped. This eternal prison existed above the East Sea, right at the heart of the sea's whirlpool. For thousands of years, many had fallen into this place. But none died from the fall because, in the end, they all left, lifted by an invisible force. Yet no one wished to return after facing such fear, and thus this place seldom saw visitors, with only a few legends circulating. Prometheus, the Bronze Age creator. Once a revered Titan deity, now reduced to a prisoner, such was the divine king's punishment for rebellion. He would remain bound here forever, until the end of time. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Ha! Accompanied by the unceasing dripping sound, faint wheezing breaths could barely be heard. Time was unknowable until, at a certain moment, bright eyes opened again in the darkness. What is this? Has someone else fallen in? The voice was deep, and the prisoner who once stole the heavenly fire looked up weakly. Despite his hands suspended in the void, his chest pierced by iron nails, the millennia of torture seemed to leave no impact. Instead, they seemed to cleanse him of certain things. Divine blood trickled from his wounds, ceaselessly tainting the ocean's scars day and night as if to mend its imperfections. But this was all something Prometheus was accustomed to. What truly made him look up was sensing life falling into the vortex once more. It's been a long time. 6,000 years. Or 7,000. Heh! I can no longer remember, but the gods remain and humans exist as well. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Divine blood slid down gracefully. The regenerative and control abilities of the Titan deities should prevent this. Yet, the iron that pierced Prometheus was a symbol of the divine king's punishment, its inflicted wounds never to heal. Not to mention the pressure from the sea. Though the bodies of the Titan gods were generally much stronger than those of later deities, it was still insufficient to support the burden of the East Sea. Of course, Prometheus didn't care about this, for he was well accustomed to it. Zeus, every so often you let people, unintentionally, fall in here. Heh, you want me to watch them plummet into the abyss. Yet give me the power to save them and let them leave. To grant freedom to others with my own hands but forever unable to redeem myself. This is what you consider to be the most despairing torture. So one day you think I will bow before time, and as the sovereign of the gods, you can always wait for that day to come. And it all starts with my watching the death of humans who fall in here. Prometheus admitted, as the forethinking god, he had made many mistakes. Perhaps he was too young, or maybe he wasn't suited to the changes after the succession of two divine kings, or perhaps he trusted too much in what he saw. Either way, bronze humanity was destroyed, and he paid the price for it. But perhaps as an observer, now imprisoned in this eternal prison, Prometheus had gained a clearer view of many things. One must always pay the price for their actions. Humans who stray into the sea also deserve to die. He could easily ignore them, and no one would know if he did. But Prometheus also knew this was an abyss that must not be entertained. With the first, there would be a second. He could watch one person die and gradually watch 2, then 3 or 5, 10. Until thousands, and eventually everyone. When that day arrived, Zeus would come before him, victorious, asking if he was willing to take back the fire he stole for humans in exchange for embracing freedom once again. The forethinking god could foresee the consequences. This was different from his blind faith in his disciples because he knew himself so well. His nature was not so noble, and he could fall in such tests. So it was only fitting that he never stood by, not even once, allowing 0 to never become 1. The sound of splashing water arose, and silently, through the millennia of flowing divine blood, Prometheus harnessed the power of the ocean. The waves rose in an upsurge, carrying the sailboat that had been sucked into the vortex off into safety. Faintly, Prometheus heard their prayers. The crew thanked the heavens, the gods, and the entity that saved them. In this moment, the people were so devout, swearing to forever worship their savior. However, Prometheus just smiled and then lowered his head in silence. He knew what would follow, for it was like many times before. In the beginning, those who escaped would be grateful. But it wouldn't take long before, as the joy of their narrow escape faded, their faith born from gratitude would disappear. Like with the bronze humanity before them, mere gifts could never satisfy humans. They would be surprised, they would worship, and then they'd grow accustomed and crave more. So, Prometheus, hiss, do you regret it? For these humans, for your creation, enduring eternal loneliness here. It was like the whisper of a demon, or perhaps it was the whisper of a demon. Chapter 782 Bronze Creator _2. In the lightless darkness, a voice echoed. No one knew who was speaking, nor how long they had been observing this place. Yet the bound creator, Prometheus, was not surprised by the sudden voice. He merely smiled and calmly responded to the unexpected visitor. After all, he had never lacked for company here. I can't say I regret it, just that I feel I could have done things more perfectly at one time. As for why it's humans, it's only that everyone has their own preferences. Some like power and strength, but I happen to find joy in the development of humans. There's no difference in stature. Zephyrus would grovel for what he desires, and I can endure pain for what I wish for, nothing more. But what about you? For what purpose have you come? Somewhat surprised, but not entirely so. A small black snake, slithering through the void, landed on the iron spike that pierced through Prometheus's chest. Again, it seemed that even as a prisoner, the creator of the Bronze Age had never been forgotten by the world. Who else has sought you out, and what did they desire? The small snake asked bluntly, and Prometheus replied just as directly. It seemed it wasn't something that would enrage the divine king, but rather a trivial, commonplace matter. At first, it was Helios. I only learned recently that something has corrupted him. He is no longer a pure Titan deity clan member. He was once responsible for imprisoning me here, and at that time I sensed the subtle relationship between him and Zeus. But he ultimately refused to believe me, until he was in such dire straits that he finally thought of me. As for his intent, he merely wanted me to proclaim how great the being he had pledged himself to was, telling me that entity could easily free me from here. Of course, the price would be for it to use my blood to infect the fissure in this ocean. SSS. The black snake hissed softly, somewhat surprised by what it learned today. Indeed, the world is not unchanging. Every entity has its own thoughts, and they don't act as you might expect. Those whose power was far less than its own were one thing, but even for a being like the mother tree, it couldn't fathom its thoughts. The sea I was a wound made by the ocean, a scar formed by the collision of the sun and sea. It had already corrupted Helios and now sought to corrupt the ocean further, which couldn't be more natural. The stars, ocean, earth. If it were not for the current world's restrictions, this outer god might have already infected the entire world. Compared to that, it was no surprise that Helios, even after being sealed, could still visit Prometheus. A mortal untouched by evil creatures, he would always find a way. And afterward? The snake continued to inquire, and Prometheus kept on answering. After that, Oceanus came to see me. This was originally the domain of the ancient sea god Pontus, yet the god of the ocean came here. I do not know his intentions, as all he asked of me was to turn a blind eye to the changes here. So did you agree this time? Of course, after all, even if he hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have warned Zeus anyway. Their struggles have nothing to do with me. Rather, Oceanus brought me quite a bit of news from the outside, which I found very interesting. His voice steady, Prometheus finished sharing his tale. Then, looking at the black snake in front of him, he asked again, "What about you? What are you here for? What do you want me to do? Is the price my freedom? Or do you seek to understand something, to consider my opinion?" SSS. Neither. On the contrary, I think that as a soothsayer of wisdom, there are many things you do not know. You're of no use to me as you are now. You need to become more useful first. A low chuckle escaped, and the black snake found Prometheus to be much more interesting now. At least now he did not seem so foolish. Thus, it shook its tail. A wisp of black mist dispersed and then condensed, eventually forming a book. Inside, there is a wealth of knowledge, secret histories, ritual tracks, and taboos. It allows one to transcend life and death, to put gods into eternal sleep, and, of course, it also contains a way for you to escape from here. How about it, I give it to you for free? What do you think? And the price? What do you need me to do? Prometheus asked, and the black snake simply shook its head amidst hissing. SSS. No need. I thought I needed something before. But now it seems you don't need me to arrange anything. Prometheus, a god who finds joy in the development of humans. Tell me or ask yourself. Suppose one day, a mortal who has been deceived by deities comes before you, one who possesses the power to influence the world's structure. He is full of courage, yet he hesitates between good and evil. He has a steadfast goal, yet he does not know that this very goal is the source of his suffering. So you tell me, will you help him? Will you do everything in your power to help him achieve his purpose? There was no response, but Prometheus knew he probably would, because he himself lacked the power to resist the divine court. But if he could see one who did have such power, then perhaps he would truly desire to help him. To cultivate an outstanding human, that must be considered a stratagem out in the open. After all, though he had come to realize much, Prometheus never minded doing something detrimental to Zeus. It seems the answer is self-evident. The black snake leaped from its spike, circling once. It scrutinized Prometheus, contemplating something further. Strictly speaking, SSS, at this point, my task is completed. But out of my own curiosity, Prometheus, I wonder, don't you want revenge on Zeus? Don't you want to avenge the beings who destroyed the bronze humanity? The gods of the underworld, they bring plagues. See Emperor Poseidon, he raises floods. Zeus in the divine court above, he is the very source of all this. Don't you want to avenge them? SSS. Prometheus, I don't know whether you wish to or not, but if one day someone uncovers the truth and seeks revenge, I hope you will not stop him. After all, an avenger should not be hindered. SSS. With the last hiss, the black snake swayed its tail, going upward with the ocean current. Just as it had said, its task was now complete. And so, in the silence of the sea eye, there remained only Prometheus, still suspended in the void. The Bronze Age creator made no promises, for he had his own judgment. Should the day come when something similar happened, he would make a choice, but it would not be swayed by the black snake's persuasions. Even as with the previous two visitors, should a fourth visitor come inquiring about all that had happened, Prometheus would not conceal today's encounter. Of course, barring any surprises, there likely would not be a next visitor. A mortal deceived by deities, possessing the power to change the world's structure. Perhaps so, whether he exists or not, I actually hope he does. If he were indeed to come here to save me, then I would teach him everything I know. Prometheus, who had learned from Oceanus and occasionally from mortals who fell into the sea eye, was not without understanding of the outside world. The laws of the world, the order of sovereign power, this world had become even more suitable for mortals than before. So if such a person were indeed to appear, it would not be surprising at all. Chapter 783 Earthborn. In the blink of an eye, the conversation over the East Sea ended. In the city of Eryxis, Heracles also bid farewell and departed. For a young man who experienced the pain of losing family and realized the divide between life and death, Heracles naturally yearned for the resurrection technique and death avoidance technique. However, just as he didn't fully trust the instructions of the god of West Wind, this young hero also held some suspicion towards the Athenian commander. Thus, he did not immediately act on what was said, but planned to verify it further during his journey. The god of West Wind's resurrection and undying technique was merely a side path, whereas the true method was in the hands of the Lord of the Spirit Realm. This was something Heracles had never heard of before, so he understandably could not blindly believe. Yet, compared to the various claims of the spirit realm, the last suggestion from the Athenian truly resonated with him. Prometheus, the creator of the Bronze Age who stole fire for humans. Perhaps I should indeed seek advice from him, even though in the mortal realm, evaluations of this Titan deity differed. Some even believed him to be the real culprit behind the destruction of bronze humanity. This thought was widespread in city-states like Olympia, but there was one point that the fourth generation of humans could not deny. No matter what kind of person Prometheus was, whether ambitious but lacking talent or stubborn and self-opinionated, at least his regard for humans was universally acknowledged. After all, as a noble Titan deity, he could have enjoyed glory rather than being imprisoned in the East Sea. However, according to legend, the sea eye of the East Sea spirals downward endlessly. Even celestial god Prometheus could only rescue those who mistakenly entered the sea eye at its very edge. Once someone falls completely into the depths of the sea eye, not even he could reverse their fate. So I need a ship capable of traveling to and fro the boundless sea eye, along with fearless crew members. Leaving Eryxis, Heracles, preparing to head to the next task location, felt some distress. In terms of shipbuilding craft, the legendary Silver Moon City seemed to have such capabilities. Perhaps once he reached there, he would have a chance to obtain their help. Yet he could not operate a ship alone, for he needed crew members equally brave enough to accompany him. Sigh. Let's focus on completing this so-called trial first. Perhaps the more places I visit, the more knowledgeable individuals like that Athenian I'll encounter. With a determined gaze, as the young hero departed from the city of Eryxis, his next target was to slay a giant beast in the continent's north. It was said to be a demon controlled by the northern evil god, whose master was also an evil god who rarely openly proclaimed its existence. This entity once challenged Apollo, who loved music and opera, but the sharp arrows of the sun god could not slay the beast controlled by the evil god in the mortal realm. Thus, Heracles took on this task, aiming to destroy the arrogant reliance of that evil god. Legend has it that the evil god was also one of the pioneers of the bard profession in the mortal realm. Sun god Apollo's church also has many poets praising the sun. Perhaps that's the reason for their enmity. I hope this time, I won't return empty-handed. A month quickly passed. Heracles was still far from the north, located on the western border of Athens, at a pass of the Egerio Mountains, stood a fortress-like great city. This was the gateway to Athens' western border and a place of natural peril. Of course, in the mythological era, peril was not merely geographical but because this mountain was extraordinary. It was once transformed from one of the strongest offspring of the ancient mountain god Aria, born around the same time as Mount Olympus. The ancient god's power had infused the mountains with powerful terrestrial energy, which the Athenians utilized. Here, the noble knights could unleash greater power, as their lineage was inherently aligned with it. As a member of the royal family, you must have heard of it, right? Chapter 784 Earth, Born_2. During the era of the first king of Athens, before Poseidon and Athena arrived here to contest for the city's ownership. At that time, the founder of this city was named Cecrops, and he was rumored to be an exceptionally unique Earthborn. They advanced along the path, arriving at the center of the fortress. Lane, amidst a cluster of stone buildings, saw Andrea clad in an entirely different attire. Compared to a king, Andrea now appeared more like a general. Light armor and a long sword at her waist matched, significantly different from her previous appearance as a godhood practitioner. Earthborn. I know the legend, but I've always thought it was just a myth. After all, in the legend, the founder of Thebes, Cadmos, who once helped the divine king during the Typhon chaos, supposedly created an Earthborn. He once slew an evil dragon bearing Typhon's blood, then planted its teeth into the ground, from which fearless warriors emerged. Cadmos then ordered them to fight each other until 5 powerful warriors remained, and their names are still known today. Hyperinor, Pi Epsilon Rho Epsilon Nu Rho, meaning Superman. Tonius, Chi Theta Nu Iota Omicron, meaning land person. Pylorus, pi epsilon lambda omicron rho, meaning huge, formidable. Eudias, omicron delta alpha epsilon, meaning of the land. And the last one, Echion, epsilon chi omega nu, meaning viper, who married Cadmos's daughter Ageo, gave birth to the next king of Thebes. It was with their support that the initial Thebes was established. But the first king of Athens, he should have nothing to do with this. Andrea recited these details with fluency, although she might not know other things as well. As a former princess, she had an extensive knowledge of the history and legends of this country. Especially the history after Athens was established, the records of the Church of Knowledge were considered quite complete, even more authentic than those circulating outside. However, there were indeed many doubts about the origin of the first Athenians. It is said that the first king was indeed earthborn, with connections to the legendary Mother Earth. So much so that the first Athenians also benefited, with the aristocrats often possessing the ability to draw power from the earth. Some say that the first king was actually a descendant of Typhon and a certain mortal, because he had a human body and a serpent's tail with immense strength, a natural demigod. But what the truth of this is, I am not entirely sure. After all, Athens, the church, both came to be only after the first king was born. Without his own records, we can only speculate. Andrea pursed her lips, though she was unsure why Lane suddenly brought up the topic of the earthborn. She shared everything she knew. After all, in her mind, Mr. Avon always knew a lot. So if he brought it up, it naturally held some significance. Yes, you're right. But strictly speaking, these are likely all true, and legend is more than just legend. Picking up a teacup, Lane took a sip, casually sitting on a chair. Concerning the origins of the first king of Athens, it was only recently that he finally discerned some clues. After all, during that time, he was far off on the borders of Hemenu, having no time to attend to the mortal realm. It was only until now that he discovered this fascinating matter. Cecrops, an earthborn with a human body and serpentine tail, in a sense, he was indeed a descendant of Mother Earth, also bearing the demonic blood of Typhon. Because his true origins actually relate to a renowned entity in the mortal realm, the primordial woman and bringer of disaster, Pandora. He should be considered Pandora's brother, and in a literal sense. Pandora? Her eyes widened, and hearing this familiar yet strange name suddenly, Andrea was genuinely surprised. Wasn't she a witch created by the gods, yet inherently evil? She was created by the gods, but few know her true origin. Lane gently shook his head, recounting the beginning. In ancient times, the Silver Generation was born in the hands of Mother Earth. They were inherently dark, despised by the gods. And Pandora was actually a divine stone left over during the creation of mankind by Mother Earth. It contained the divine energy of procreation of humankind. But since the Silver Generation didn't need to reproduce, it remained as a stone. Later on, when the divine King Zeus conceived the idea of creating the Bronze Generation, this stone was discovered. Subsequently, the gods sculpted the world's first and most beautiful woman, Pandora, from it, embodying all female traits. Her birth symbolized humanity acquiring the ability to reproduce, although, in truth, it was not that with women humans could reproduce. Rather, it was only when the stone imbued with reproductive power was carved into a human that humanity had women. As for Cecrops, he arose from the stone fragments chipped away while sculpting Pandora, and when the demonic blood fell upon them, the Earthborn with a human head and serpent's body was born. Chapter 785 Earth, Born_3. A human head and a snake's body. Whenever Lane thought of this image, he couldn't help but marvel at the wonders of creation. Just like humans were always special in every myth, it seemed that in every myth, there existed some form of human head and snake body being. Some were the ancestors of humans, others were demons wielding abnormal power. Some could stir the tides of life, while others were earthly creatures born of nature. Like the Great Flood, traces of their existence spread throughout the world. Perhaps there really was something special about this form, which led to such coincidences. So, Pandora is considered a member of the royal family of Athens. Actually, she was the original elder princess, and she is even still alive today? Andrea was quite surprised, not fully understanding what Lane meant, but even this secret history was astonishing to her. The royal family of Athens was different from other kingdoms. It was hard to say which deity was their direct ancestor. The Amazons carried Aphrodite's divine blood, and the Western countries were not short of descendants of Ares and Zeus. The seaside kingdoms had the blood of the sea god. Unexpectedly, Athens had now found its ancestral lineage, though it did not sound great. Neither a demon once causing chaos in the mortal realm nor a witch bringing disasters. One could say so, and from this perspective, Athens's involvement in all gods' war further affirms Pandora's disastrous reputation. Whether this had any connection to Pandora, Lane did not know. After all gods' war was originally driven by Zeus, which didn't seem related to Pandora. But Lane remembered the gift he had given, the magic jar containing hope. Thinking about today's events, could destiny possibly have used it to fan the flames? If so, what was the true nature of this matter? Was associating Pandora with a disaster spanning the world helping her in some way? If so, then why did she not achieve this change after the Great Flood? Destiny. Lane did not know what changes might have occurred to Pandora during this time, since not even the divine parts were with Chaos. Even if they were, Lane couldn't possibly monitor Gaia's every move, but he still felt that there was likely some secret here that he could not yet unravel. As one of the 4 pillars of the world's creation, many gods were involved with destiny, but none ever claimed outright mastery over it. Nyx couldn't, the Moirai couldn't, Lane couldn't. To truly understand its secret, he first had to reclaim everything of spirituality. Only between equals could there be a chance of insight. And even though he had already used various means to reclaim the spiritual parts from different divine authorities, it was still far from complete. The world has 2 sides, the material and the spiritual. Perhaps only when those held by the present world are split will they be returned to me one by one. Pandora and Heracles, they were just the preludes to this process. The current war in Athens was just part of that prelude as well. So Lane smiled and brought the topic back. Enough, the story is over. Whether it'll be useful, we'll see in the future. Back to the current war, the Western countries are already preparing an alliance. This stronghold is indeed powerful, but purely defending. A prolonged defense will surely fail. So you must take the initiative, strike them before they gather, suppress their momentum, and also build reputation for yourself. But remember, don't become overly engaged in the battle. Smiling, Lane asked, "Well, are you confident?" "Of course." Nodding affirmatively, Andrea gripped the sword tightly in her hand, as if Theseus were still by her side. The Western countries were at varying distances from Athens, naturally arriving at different times. Additionally, they needed to appoint a commander, unify command. These were not things that could be done in a day or two. The war between Athens and all countries was destined to be protracted. As the new king, even though still inexperienced, Andrea had to learn how to lead and fight on the battlefield.
Chapter 786 Alliance.
The deep autumn wind swept across the wilderness, heralding the premonition of winter. The sun rose in the east, but its light was obscured by clouds, appearing somewhat dim and lightless. Several hundred miles west of the Aigaleo Mountains, the goddess of dawn, Eos, had just revealed her delicate face. Continuous encampments were established atop a hill, beside a branch of river. It was an apt place for an army to station, leveraging the advantageous terrain and proximity to water sources. Clearly, although there was no expectation of assault here, the command of this army was not negligent. Sentinel and patrol distributions were strategically arranged, appearing orderly. In the camp, the army was now busily preparing breakfast. "How is it? This is your first time leading an army? Do you feel nervous now?" On a huge boulder at the hill, Mode, clad in armor, asked with a smile. Over the years, the once young man had matured significantly, but his personality hadn't changed much. "Nervous, perhaps a bit. But I feel more excitement than anything. Shaking his head slightly, Odysseus replied with a smile, "Aren't you feeling the same? Under the guidance of the gods, storming fortresses and defeating the armies of great nations, spreading our own fame. Such was the way of ancient heroes, and now it is our turn." Ha ha ha! That's indeed true. Ancient heroes did such deeds, and now it's our turn. Laughing loudly, Mode took a sip of wine. Indeed, whether it was he or Odysseus, or even those from Argos, Mycenae, Tiryns, Thebes, including Troy city, the kings and commanders of these kingdoms all arrived here with similar sentiments, never questioning the victory of this war. Though they were to attack Athens, a kingdom protected by the goddess of wisdom, this time they had the help of all gods. Compared to the difficulties of war, they cared more about who would lead the alliance to victory. Even Odysseus, upon learning about the situation with Eryxis, was the same. Those beasts that could breach walls were merely unchallenged. Such events will not be repeated here. However, to speak of which, Odysseus, my friend, Ithaca is but a small islet in the ocean. We originally should have accepted the will of the sea god, launching an assault from the sea under the leadership of the kingdom of Pylus. But unexpectedly, you were favored by the heavenly empress, receiving divine decree to command Argos' army. Turning to survey the tents on the hill, Mode had to admit, the states on this mortal continent were indeed more powerful. Looking at these soldiers, and their armed equipment, Ithaca doesn't have as many minerals, nor as many people, nor as many godhood practitioners. It truly is enviable. But there is one thing they can't match, and that is, they lack a hero like you who can command an army. Only the Wolf King can lead the pack of wolves. Otherwise, they are just a pack of jackals, scattering in the face of beasts. Ha 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 ha. Taking another sip of wine, Mode's face turned a bit red. Odysseus just smiled at this, though he did not counter him. On the mortal continent, heroes were still emerging, like Diomedes, the king of Argos, who was exceptionally brave. Yet, perhaps due to his lack of cunning, the heavenly empress did not ultimately entrust him with the command of the army. In addition, he had also heard that Hector from the Troy kingdom would participate in this siege against Athens. He was a hero of extraordinary martial prowess, well known to Odysseus, and Aeneas also a general from Troy. Moreover, in rumors, Aeneas was a demigod birthed from mortal Anchises and the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite, known for his archery and considerable fame. Still, within Troy's forces, he never ranked above Hector. From this perspective, the Troy kingdom was indeed powerful. Besides, Menelaus, the king of Sparta, and Agamemnon from Mycenae, although these famous figures hadn't done deeds as grand as those of Theseus, nobody could deny their strength. Even Odysseus himself, though never unduly modest, felt he could surpass others in cunning but did not believe his martial prowess was uniquely unparalleled. Alas, King Theseus has died, and I have no chance to compete with him on the battlefield. Mode. How far is it to the rendezvous point of the alliance? About 3 days' journey. We are very close now. But Odysseus, are you truly decided on what to do when the time comes? With bright eyes, Mode looked at his friend. We all know, the alliance needs a commander, at least nominally. Even if all gods command us to besiege Athens, they never stipulated this. If it were me, I would only wish to follow your command, rather than those foreigners unrelated to us. After all, they might be competent alone, but the victory of war never depends on one person. Let's discuss that when the time comes. Somewhat vexed, but Odysseus knew he could not shirk, because he was equally clear that the heavenly empress, having chosen him to lead the Argos army, would not allow him to follow the commands of other divinity adherents. This was not the original war of Troy, and Athens had no divinely cast indestructible walls. At least for now, no one believed they would fail, so a compromise was impossible. Let's meet with the heroes of all countries first, and if that doesn't work, we'll divide our forces. Although once the Aigaleo mountains are breached, it will be much easier moving forward. But there is never just one road leading to Athens. The more powerful people are, the more they believe in power. In this regard, Odysseus didn't think he could easily convince the leaders of other city-state kingdoms. So he planned to first meet at the prearranged location of all countries and then take it one step at a time. After breakfast, the enormous army immediately broke camp. The meeting point of the alliance was a plain by the river, which was once a common resting area for merchant caravans. Since the distances from their respective countries to Athens varied, their arrival times naturally couldn't be synchronized. Odysseus considered himself among the faster ones. Try not to be the first to start a conflict, since the all-gods were still watching them. With this thought in mind, 3 days later, Odysseus arrived at his destination. However, to his surprise, what awaited him was not the earlier arrival of allied forces but rather a group of defeated and disorganized soldiers. To the west of the Agaleo Mountains ran the Kephisos River. The meeting point arranged in advance by the alliance was here, due to its logistical security. The wide plain by the river was sufficient for a large army to encamp. However, when Odysseus arrived, all he saw was a vast expanse of swirling mud and the moans of injured soldiers. In the distance, thousands of knights were blood-stained with their lances. The figure leading them was somewhat familiar to Odysseus. Yet, upon noticing his arrival, the knights didn't stay but quickly rode away. Clearly, they were not prepared to face the verified military formation of Odysseus at this time. What has happened here? What just occurred here? The shocked voices came from beside him, but Odysseus couldn't afford to respond. His expression was solemn as he unhesitatingly rode towards the camp in front. The approach of his large army inevitably caught the attention of the soldiers present, and the flags of Ithaca and Argos were starkly vibrant. As if breathing a sigh of relief, Odysseus saw that the large group of soldiers no longer maintained their formation. And within the military array, someone rode towards him. "Excuse me, is the visitor His Highness Diomedes of Argos?" From a great distance, Odysseus heard the voice of the newcomer. "No, I am Odysseus of Ithaca. By the command of all gods, I am entitled to command the army and participate in the assembly of all nations. What happened here? Did the Athenians raid your camp?" As the two sides approached, Odysseus also saw the appearance of the newcomer. The damaged armor was stained with blood, and the person looked as though soaked in water. His gaze swept through the surrounding environment, guessing at the prior situation. And the following exchange confirmed his suspicions. These were the advanced soldiers of Mycenae, one of the powerful kingdoms of the age. Their army was not weak. Even if the Athenians were brave, they couldn't have caused such disarray with just these men. However, the Athenians were visibly not stubborn. They had wisdom. Besides the power of divine arts, they also had the assistance of wizards. Thus, beside Phasis River, the Mycenaean people witnessed the ruthlessness of fire and water. So, you're saying they moved rocks to the rivers upstream, forging a temporary dam. But this crudely made dam couldn't hold long and was broken down by a heavy rain. Then the Athenians used witchcraft to manipulate the river and flooded your camp, taking this as an opportunity to launch an attack? Judging the surrounding terrain, theoretically, it was impossible for horses to gallop on the ground after a large flooding. This was illogical. Yet the words of the Mycenaean vanguard before him were so convincing that Odysseus had to believe them. The alliance army of all countries was arriving, yet the Athenians dared to leave a strategic pass. It must be said, their leaders were quite courageous. But let's backtrack. The commander of that group of knights I saw earlier, have I seen him before? Frowning, he then dismissed the vague sense of familiarity from his mind. Perhaps he had seen him, but Odysseus now had no time to focus on such trivial matters. This was a warning and also a caution. The abilities of the church's priests often related to the deities they worshipped, and followers of the sea god were rare across the continent. Thus, in the wars of the nations, anything related to water was often neglected and no proper precautions were taken. Wait for your king to arrive. Speaking in a heavy tone, the nearby area was no longer usable for stationing an army. Thus, Odysseus signaled for the army to continue forward and consoled the general whose fate was likely not very promising. "We will retaliate. We will show the Athenians the strength of the heroes of all nations. Duels before the battle were still common in this era. Of course, Odysseus would not stand down himself. This time it was unfortunate for Mycenae, and naturally it was Agamemnon who should respond to the challenge. Chapter 787 Missing. Under the gloomy sky, the sunlight was blocked by clouds. The battlefield, just flooded by a vast expanse of water, was desolate and bleak. It hit the soldiers, who longed for wealth and victory, like a cold bucket of water over their heads. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away from the Aigaleo Mountains on a perilous peak, the gods were also speechless. The alliance was nearing, and a grand war was about to unfold. Perhaps due to the rhythm of godhood, Ares had been particularly excited in recent days, especially since the Spartans, who formerly revered Apollo more than him, were also willing to obey the will of the gods, which improved his mood even further. However, while he was loudly discussing his martial skills and explaining battle techniques to the goddesses, he never expected to witness such a scene. There was no charge of battle formations, no clash of courage, no contest of martial prowess. The Athenians simply used the force of the water to breach the camp, followed by a massacre. The vanguard warriors of Mycenae had not even managed to see the faces of their enemies before they were cut open by the knights following the water. Most of them, caught off guard and unable to don their armor, became just another soul under the riders' lances. It all happened too quickly, so quickly that Ares had no time to react. So much so that he was still extolling courage and martial skills when someone told him that these are not always of use. This is a despicable act, a shameless plot. If the sides had formed up, even against the elite Athenian knights, we wouldn't have failed so easily. Grinding his teeth, even though Mycenae wasn't a city-state that worshipped Ares as the principal god, the war god still appeared very angry. It was against the rules and the aesthetics of war. There should have been a duel between heroes from each side in front of their formations, and then the victory of one would boost their morale and lead the attack on the defeated. Using the power of nature to win was morally corrupt. Cough, cough. But they did do it. So Ares, what are you planning to do about it? Among the gods, a distinctive presence spoke. Ares looked in the direction of the voice but saw only a face mask made of gold. It was a chair floating in the air, surrounded by a hazy halo that obscured the view. On it sat a robust yet somewhat short figure. That cripple again. Even though the mask hid the other's face, Ares couldn't hide his disgust. If it weren't for his craftsmanship, what right did he have to stand here with him? Humph! Such shameless behavior should be condemned. Everyone should denounce the actions of the Athenians. Gritting his teeth, Ares finally squeezed out these words. And he knew that it was, in fact, just a platitude. In classical times, no matter which civilization, which world, human wars were somewhat courteous. Perhaps because there weren't many people in ancient times, or maybe because transportation was inconvenient, mere killing and occupying land didn't mean much. Either in the West or the East, they had an era when courtesy was observed on the battlefield. Like not striking an injured knight, helping enemies fix their chariot if seen damaged during a pursuit, then watching them continue before chasing again. Or not attacking enemies crossing a river, not attacking an army that was not yet ready, and so on. Of course, all this courtesy was not permanent. Often, it would be discarded as the eras progressed. Just like an initial burst of activity followed by decline and exhaustion. The original story was merely about someone who discarded ritual propriety, triumphing over those who observed it. As the subsequent collapse of ritual, it became a representation of cunning. Today's people in chaos are also living in such times. Though there are so-called conventional rules amongst nations, not everyone observes them. Similar behaviors are commonplace, and since Athens was already notoriously targeted, denouncing their actions was ineffectual. There's nothing to be done. What's the use of saying these things? With a sneer, the god in the floating chair received an angry glare from Ares, but Hephaestus had no reaction. Although he was present, that didn't mean he had any interest in attacking Athens. It was only because Aphrodite had personally invited him. Chapter 788 Disappearance_2. They not only never had any contradictions, but their relationship was very close. However, Apollo was not there to listen to nonsense. Speaking of which, you really should learn from Athena. It's proven, wisdom leads to victory in war more effectively than courage and martial arts. This was not sarcasm, Apollo truly believed this. However, when these words reached Ares' ears, they were not taken the same way. Far from it? What a joke. It wasn't me commanding the battle. This failure was only due to the incompetence of those mortals. With a shout of anger, Ares' gaze turned icy. Apollo, since you like to throw around such idle words, why don't you demonstrate your archery and shoot all those Athenians dead? If you can't do that, then stop wasting words here. Can't do it? Heh, Ares, Athens is still too far from me, but you are quite close. Why don't you try my arrows first and get tired from that? Hearing this, color drained from Apollo's face as he grasped the silver bow from his back. Intangible, their auras clashed in the void, as if they were about to break into a major fight the next second. However, the next moment, a streak of thunder split between them and immediately halted the tense atmosphere. Enough! With an unpleasant expression, Hera didn't know what sin she had committed to always encounter such situations. They were akin to a rabble. If they weren't gods, they might not even compare to the mortal Odysseus. After all, although he lacked such great strength and immortality, he was at least organizing wounded soldiers and looking for a camp, rather than engaging in meaningless quarrels and internal strife like them. Fine, since you're all useless, I'll do it myself. Expressionless, Hera first looked towards the goddess of beauty. More trouble than they're worth, that was what such creatures were. Aphrodite, didn't you say you could get Demeter to join us completely? Where is she now? How should I know she could endure so much? With a somewhat ugly expression, Aphrodite was also somewhat speechless. Is Demeter made of cotton? What is she doing now? It looks like we can't count on her. I knew you couldn't accomplish anything. Ignoring the increasingly ugly expression of the goddess of beauty, Hera once again looked at her son whom she had borne alone. Hephaestus. Hera had complex feelings for him. When Zeus brought him back, Hera was surprised. But when he was enthroned as the principal god and married Eurynomy's daughter, she didn't stop it. Born out of her own spite, he was naturally ugly. But as he grew up, his abilities were extraordinary. Regardless, now that he was here, it was time for him to be useful. Hephaestus, I want you to craft a suit of armor for the heroes of the mortal realm. It must be indestructible, impervious to mortal weapons. This should be easy for you. Not hard, but it will take a few months. Speaking indifferently, Hephaestus responded as if he answering a request from a stranger deity. Fine. It will also take about that long for the kingdoms of the mortals to unite. Seeing she had received a satisfactory answer, Hera turned to Apollo. Apollo, I have no demands for you. But as you travel the skies every day, you must see all that happens in the mortal realm. In critical moments, I want you to aid the mortal armies in resolving their crises, which shouldn't be hard for you. I understand, when I see Artemis, I will take action personally. Nodding in agreement, Apollo, who had been persecuted by this heavenly empress along with his mother, held no good impression of her. However, since they now shared a common goal, he agreed for the time being. Nodding slightly, Hera then arranged some other matters. Although they were numerous and powerful, the saying went, even when a lion hunts a rabbit, it uses all its strength. And Athena was no rabbit. Unfortunately, Zephyrus is not here. He is much stronger than Aphrodite. If it weren't for her acting on her own, maybe Demeter would have been rescued by now instead of hiding somewhere unknown now. Thinking this in her heart, Hera was somewhat irritable. Heracles, the glory of Hera. She was not unaware of the mortal's extraordinary talent, but she still did not plan to contact him directly. After all, their direct grievances had a long history. She still remembered that day Zeus and Alcmena had conceived the child, and the divine king even declared that his next descendant would have a boundless future and great achievements. So, she used her divine authority of childbirth to allow another descendant of Zeus to be born first, thwarting his plans. Alcmena was so frightened that she dared not raise the child and thus abandoned him in the fields. Perhaps it was fate's coincidence, but it was on that very day Hera happened to pass by these fields. Seeing the abandoned child, who was so adorable, she chose to nurse him with her own milk. The milk of a deity, especially from Hera who presides over childbirth, possessed extraordinary power. The exceptional nature of Heracles was established from birth, and so was his name. Despite several twists and turns afterward, the child coincidentally returned to his birth mother's side, and after realizing this, Hera even tried to send snakes to kill him. But as a child nurtured by Hera for a day, he still acquired the name Heracles, which could never be erased. Thus, Hera's attitude towards him was equally complex. She did not resort to schemes to persecute him, but neither did she intend to become involved with him. Rather, it is Zeus, ha! You really have your eye on him. Hera sneered coldly. The place where Zephyrus was likely represented some aspect of Zeus's will. So Zephyrus paying attention to Heracles amounted to Zeus paying attention as well. And what was so special about him that Zeus cared so much? However, it was probably not a good thing, as few who had drawn Zeus's attention had encountered good fortune. On a nameless mountain peak, Hera thought about the whereabouts of the god of west wind. To the east of the earth, the armies of all countries were also slowly gathering. Yet at this moment Zephyrus, whom the heavenly empress pondered upon, was not at ease. Following the orders of the divine king, he had not easily convinced that special mortal to act according to his demands, but who knew the first trial would go wrong. Demeter was supposed to be trapped in the city, but then she disappeared. This made Zephyrus, who later understood the whole story, curse Aphrodite silently for creating a mess, but he had no choice but to clean up. So he immediately arranged a second task, sending Heracles north of the main road to hunt a formidable demon lion. Regarding that lion, Zephyrus did not know much either. He only knew it rampaged in the north, not even fearing Apollo's divine bow. But no matter what it was, Zephyrus didn't think Heracles would fail. If he indeed faced difficulties, wasn't he there to help? Back in the day, Perseus had a full set of divine artifacts on his adventures. Of course, if possible, he would still let Heracles solve it himself. After all, this was his trial and a way to hone his capabilities. But where is he, though? Transformed into intangible wind, Zephyrus meandered over a forest that stretched for hundreds of miles. This was the north of Athens, inherently colder and more desolate. But the mythic world always had various surprises, such as this place. However, these were not of concern to the god of west wind. What really troubled him was that he had followed Heracles along the way, but after taking a break, he had lost sight of him. Such a large living person, where could he have gone? Damn it! Although my skill in concealing my tracks is unmatched in the world, finding people is indeed not my forte. Frowning, Zephyrus recalled the only mistake in his life. At that time, it was during the reign of the second generation of divine kings, and he was responsible for monitoring whether anyone sneakily entered the Delphi plain, where Gaia resided. Somehow, Iapetus had managed to get in. This was not because his ability to conceal his tracks was lacking. It was simply because he hadn't seen it. If only I had the ability of the high-altitude observer from the ancient sun god. If so, such an oversight would not have occurred. He gritted his teeth silently, but soon after, the god of west wind comforted himself. No deity is invincible. Every god has weaknesses. Since heaven had already granted him one ability, giving him a flaw also seemed not out of place. Chapter 789 Theater. Nameless forest stretched under the sky as the god of west wind, having lost track of his target, fruitlessly searched for the lost child. However, Zephyrus wasn't all that anxious about the matter. After all, it was just a brief rest, not a significant delay, and the person shouldn't have gotten far. After all, where could a lone person possibly run? He thought this and acted accordingly. Unbeknownst to the god of west wind, as he searched, Heracles cleaved a path through the obstructive shrubs of the nameless forest beneath him. Swish! Crack! Blade met shrub as he advanced, wearing down the edge of his weapon. The original jungle was lush, impeding passage unless cleared. Fortunately, Heracles, possessing tremendous strength, cared little for such expenditure of effort. It simply took a bit more time. Phew! The Noma's lion, who knows where it hides? The god arranging this trial never mentioned it. Perhaps finding it is part of the trial. His spirits were high, revealing no trace of the journey's toil. During these days, Heracles often felt intuitive signals but had never noticed the god of west wind secretly following him. After all, Zephyrus was a deity holding authority. He was not easily exposed, certainly not to Heracles, who lacked means beyond brute force. Thus, the young hero was unaware that he vanished inexplicably from the god's sight. In contrast, he pondered how to complete his task. While in Eryxis, Heracles met a well-learned Athenian who proved through actions that tales of Athenians' extensive knowledge were not unfounded. Yet, the hero before him wasn't one to blindly follow. Whether the god of west wind's words or lanes, he was only half convinced. So, the trial had to continue to completion and the sea, still to be crossed. But meanwhile, he planned to gather more information and learn more about the secrets involved. This trial was a great opportunity, especially since Heracles had never been to the northern continent. He had long heard that evil gods ran rampant here but had never seen these excluded entities of mainstream faith. Perhaps here he could learn more. Whoosh! Suddenly, he raised his hand and caught a sharp bone arrow. A green glow flashed across the razor-sharp arrowhead. It was undoubtedly coated in poison. Yet, the arrow, crafted from giant beast bones, couldn't even scratch the hero's skin, leaving only a white mark. Who's there? Rustling. His sharp gaze bore into the distance, where he saw two figures emerging from the forest underbrush. One held a bow, speaking in words Heracles couldn't understand. Oh! Silent and at a loss for words, Heracles found himself momentarily speechless. Stop there. I am Heracles, traveling from the south of the earth, here to slay the demons wreaking havoc. Who are you, and why attack me unprovoked? Once more, silence enveloped them. Though unsure if his words could be understood, Heracles spoke. Whether understood or not, it demonstrated his desire to communicate. However, judging by their reactions, his words had no effect. The people clothed in animal skins eyed him warily as if guarding against an enemy, and Heracles grew impatient. If communication truly failed, he would have to take on these hostile figures. Just as he prepared to act, Heracles saw the underbrush behind them rustle again. An older man emerged, waving his hand, and two beams of light fell upon the bow-wielding duo. Please forgive our rudeness, distinguished traveler. They meant no harm, as this area has always been our tribe's hunting grounds. We hunt here, offering our catch to the deities. The incident just now was likely because they mistook you for an enemy. But I know that a strong individual like you wouldn't concern yourself with us. Though still in that strange tongue, this time Heracles understood. Was it the rumored shaman demon technique, allowing people to understand each other's meaning? Yet in Heracles' eyes it seemed more like divine arts. Regardless of what it was, as long as communication could happen, it was fine.
No harm.
I am Heracles, from Thebes, here to hunt the Noma's lion. Even in the south, I'd heard of its impenetrable hide, not even pierced by Apollo's arrows. But it can't stop me, so by divine guidance, I will eliminate this threat. His tone was calm and matter-of-fact. Although Heracles had encountered fearsome demons considered powerful by ordinary people, they fell easily in his hands. Perhaps this lion was a challenge, but Heracles didn't think it could truly stop him. He was more interested in these local people he encountered. The god of west wind had warned him that the monstrous lion was under an evil god's control. And being an evil god, it would surely have followers and tribes. Who knew what these people were? Maybe they were evil god believers. Being outwardly harmless didn't mean they weren't a disguise. With vigilance, Heracles watched their reaction. Surprisingly, none of the three seemed disturbed by his claims. They didn't view his coming to hunt the giant lion as wrong. On the contrary, the old man even smiled happily, welcoming him. In the ensuing conversation, Heracles unexpectedly discovered they knew the whereabouts of the Noma's lion and even some of its secrets. "Hero from afar, the tribe welcomes you. And about the Noma's lion, we do have some knowledge." On the way back to the elder's tribe, Heracles listened as he spoke. "It is said that when the king of all monsters ravaged the world, the gods of Olympus fled. The power of the 100-headed dragon serpent was something they couldn't contend with. Few gods who resisted paid the price, and Hestia was one of them. Though the goddess of Hrothfire is a noble principal god, she was no match for the primal ancestor of demons. During one grievous wound, her blood flowed onto the earth and was acquired by a fortunate demon. That demon, bathed in divine blood, became the Noma's lion." The elder spoke smoothly, as if witnessing it firsthand. After hearing this, Heracles found one of his uncertainties resolved. To emerge unscathed from Apollo's arrows wasn't a trivial matter, even if his silver bow wasn't truly a divine weapon. Yet, if the lion's hide had been tempered by the goddess's divine blood, it could undoubtedly advance from its original state. "But it still can't stop me, impenetrable hide or not." With confidence in his voice, Heracles was unconcerned about a formidable enemy. "So please tell me its whereabouts. I'd be grateful for your help." "Of course, I won't deter you." The elder nodded, smiled, and continued, "I only wish to remind you that if you do kill the lion, why not bathe in its blood and don its hide? Perhaps this could transform you, granting even greater strength." With a slight shift in expression, Heracles took note of this. It made some sense. Once he succeeded, perhaps he could indeed try. Without following the elder back to their tribe, after learning the lion's location, Heracles set out alone once more. Meanwhile, as he and the elder conversed, an unseen wind circled above 3 times, yet failed to detect his trace. While this chance encounter was somewhat unexpected, the young hero did gain new insights from it. The only odd thing he felt was that the two with the bows seemed rather stiff. Maybe it's because they rarely interact with outsiders. Nothing peculiar about that. Thinking privately, Heracles pressed on. Before parting, the elder had warmly invited him to visit their tribe, wearing the beast's hide. Once he defeated the lion so the youth could witness such a hero. Given the elder saved him significant time, Heracles agreed. "Come then, my life's first genuine great battle." Full of fighting spirit, Heracles gripped a stone club he'd carelessly picked up. According to the elder, the lion was no more than a day's journey away. Since starting out, he had yet to engage in a full-fledged fight. Today, at last, he had the chance. Rustling, watching Heracles depart, the elder lingered at the spot for a while longer. But he didn't enjoy the peace for long before feeling a pat on his shoulder. "I know, we're heading back now." Unfazed, the elder glanced at the 2 young bowmen. "How nice. At least they don't feel anything." Shaking his head, the elder then followed a small path back. The mountain forests had no roads, but where people often traversed, paths emerged. Following the trampled trace, the elder pressed on. Not long past a towering tree, the view before him opened up. Though called a tribe, what lay before the elder now was a city. Stone-paved roads, people moving to and fro, and merchants trading. Seeing the temples of the gods hinted from afar, the city seemed even more comprehensive than external cities. While external cities might lack temples for every god, here, it seemed each had one. The flow of people was constant, with occasional calls from vendors reaching the ear. Yet none reacted to the elder's arrival as if there was no one there at all. Unconcerned, the elder simply watched as the bowmen left and set off purposefully for the city center. Passing craftsmen at work and priests before temples, he halted at the city's heart only then. There stood a great temple dedicated to Zeus, the grandest of them all. Not entering, he lingered a moment. But Zeus' temple remained unchanged, just as it always was. He turned to leave and headed toward the outer parts of the city. Traversing streets and brushing past countless passers-by, his final stop was a blacksmith shop, the city's lone functioning yet abandoned place. He gave it a complex look, then continued onward, arriving before a small courtyard. Knock, knock, knock. Come in. The voice inside was calm. The elder pushed open the door. Inside was a modest scene, a simple yard. The only difference was the folk sitting within. One was a young child, delicately manipulating threads as small wooden figures danced. The other was the young man who had spoken before. Upon close inspection, one would find he had no face. It was as if something wiped it away, like some unseen taboo. He wasn't meant to have one, nor was he allowed. Faceless, youthful laughter, joyfully dancing wooden figures, an otherwise chilling tableau, yet for now, the elder merely waited. He'd seen such sights often. Nothing but silence. He only needed to wait patiently. Sir, he must be seeking me. I'll excuse myself for now. Finally, after a long moment when a dance concluded, the child stood, speaking apologetically. The faceless youth nodded, indifferent to his departure. The child led the elder out, closing the gate behind. As the courtyard shut, an unspoken aura enveloped the alley, or perhaps the city. It seems you found him, Mr. Andy? His expression shifted from joy to calm as the child asked softly. Yes, Mr. Andy. Bowing slightly, a flicker shone in Colin's eyes. Just as you arranged. That outsider accepted my invitation, and he's hunting the lion now. When he's done, he'll come here. Is that so? Nodding, the youth remained indifferent. Heracles, he wasn't the first, nor would he be the last. If only he had some ability to aid, for there was something he sought an answer to. Chapter 790, line. What did the demons look like in battle? In most cases, they relied on their innate gifts and generally powerful physiques. Because, just like a true god's authority, whether it was the titans born from the first epoch or the father of monsters' many offspring, truly powerful demons possessed some special abilities. For instance, the Gorgon's petrifying gaze, the Cyclops' smithing talent, or the nine-headed snake and sphinx formed from Typhon's blood. Some of them possessed an undying body, while others tested their opponents with riddles. If those could not be answered, it violated the order they established, and they lost the strength to resist, left at their mercy. Like its kindred, the Noma's lion was no different. It had an invulnerable hide, and with just one glance, when Heracles found the giant lion by a small lake in the forest, he knew it could not be defeated by brute force alone. Everything had a weakness, and the giant lion was no exception. Roar! Bang! Bang! No need for communication, nor was there any. The Noma's lion was not a demon with wisdom. It was bloodthirsty and savage. With a mighty roar, Heracles' fist struck the giant lion's body. Compared to the towering and robust body of the demon, a mortal seemed insignificant before it. Yet, under Heracles' fist, the giant lion was still sent flying. Thick trees snapped like stalks of wheat, only slightly delaying the demon's speed. Undoubtedly, in the collision of strength, Heracles had the upper hand. But looking at the enemy before him, the young hero's expression grew more solemn. Bang! The giant lion rose from the ground, shaking its head. Its enormous eyes brimmed with brutality. It opened its bloody maw at the distant tiny creature, bursting with astounding power. Although Heracles' strength was immense, it inflicted no real harm on it. Without hesitation, the giant lion charged forward, aiming to bite its enemy. It wasn't the first time it fought against humans. More than one so-called hero from human kingdoms sought to gain fame through its life, but they all met the same fate. No matter how powerful they were or how sharp their weapons, if they couldn't make it bleed, they became meals for the giant lion. Roar! Faced with the gaping maw of the demon, Heracles advanced instead of retreating. He wished to test whether the giant lion's oral cavity was as impervious as its body surface to all external harm. Treading 2 steps, he leapt into the air. Like jumping into the abyss, Heracles leapt into the giant lion's mouth. The iron rod he carried became indestructible under his matchless strength before smashing into the demon's lower jaw. Boom! Crack, crack. Deep thuds accompanied by the sound of grinding teeth. At this moment, both Heracles and the Noma's lion found each other formidable opponents. The iron rod pounded inside the demon's mouth, unable to harm it, just as when it struck an exterior. Yet when the giant lion's maw closed, it felt as if it had bitten down on an unyielding golden stone, unable to wound the opponent. And it wasn't only that, as soon as its mouth closed, a surging force gradually pried it open. The young hero forcibly pried open the demon's jaws with his hands, and in front of him, the Noma's lion's strength seemed nothing extraordinary. Despite the apparent difference in size, their powers were not dissimilar. Roar! Hiss! For a moment, the foreign object sensation in its mouth made the giant lion more enraged, and a noxious gas mixed with gastric acid expelled from its throat. Even though Heracles feared no harm, looking at his corroded clothing and the foul stench, he took the chance to leap out of the giant lion's mouth. At this point, both recognized the enemy's strength. Throwing aside the iron rod, ordinary weapons were already of no help to Heracles. He swung his fists, smashing towards the lion's head. Divine blood boiled inside him, and his unparalleled power smashed onto the demon's head, causing a tremendous roar. The giant lion, having just spit out the foreign object, was again slammed and sent flying. Its massive body leveled large swathes of the forest, yet only moments later, it stood again in the dust. As legends sang, the Noma's lion's hide was invulnerable. Maybe a truly mighty divine artifact could pierce it, but bare hands alone, Heracles found himself at an impasse. Even if his fists could shatter iron, even if his surging vitality made him immune to most spells and malice in the world, even if his divine power was unrivaled, facing such an invulnerable demon, he still found himself at a loss. The battle stretched from morning to noon, and from noon to night. The young hero tried various methods. He attempted to attack the giant lion's eyes, but it merely closed its eyes, the eyelids shielding it from Heracles' assault. He also tried to break the giant lion's teeth, but despite his transcendent physique, he was not indestructible and could not ignore the demon's attacks. Gradually, the sun set and rose again. Rolling, biting, poisonous mist, the Noma's lion also employed numerous methods to kill its opponent but could not succeed. One man and one lion seemed locked in stalemate, neither able to defeat the other. Roar!